My brother told me that my presence would completely ruin his perfect wedding aesthetic. He told me to keep my weird kid away and just stay home. I did not yell. I did not argue. I just hung up the phone and froze every single credit line with my name attached. 3 days later, at his incredibly expensive venue, his black card declined, and my mother was red in the face, calling my phone over and over in an absolute panic. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who treated you like a burden while secretly living off your back. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 72 hours before what my family was calling the social event of the decade. I am Keisha, 35 years old, a single mother, and in the eyes of my parents and brother, nothing more than a struggling freelance accountant. The morning sun was streaming through the kitchen windows of my modest townhouse in Atlanta. I was standing at the stove flipping blueberry pancakes, the sweet smell of butter and maple syrup filling the air. Sitting at the kitchen island was my 8-year-old son, Jamal. He was carefully arranging his collection of toy cars in a perfect color-coded line across the granite countertop. As he worked, he let out a soft, rhythmic hum, a self-soothing sound that he always made when he was deeply concentrated. Jamal is autistic, and he is the brightest, most beautiful part of my entire existence. My phone vibrated on the counter, disrupting the quiet peace of our morning routine. The caller ID flashed with the face of my younger brother, Trayvon. At 32 years old, Trayvon was a junior executive at a logistics firm, but he carried himself like he owned the entire eastern seaboard. He was the undisputed golden child of our family, the shining beacon of black excellence that my parents paraded around their elite church circles and alumni events. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered the call, expecting a last-minute question about the wedding schedule. "Keisha, we have a major problem," Trayvon said, his voice tight and unnaturally fast. He did not bother with a good morning or asking how his nephew was doing. He just launched straight into a frantic explanation about the venue capacity, the floral arrangements, and how the seating chart was completely messed up. I listened patiently, stirring my coffee. I asked him how I could help, offering to run down to the venue and assist with the logistics. "That is the thing," Trayvon stammered, pausing for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You cannot come to the wedding." I stopped stirring my coffee. The metal spoon clinked softly against the side of the ceramic mug. I asked him to repeat himself, sure that I had misheard him. "I am saying you cannot be there, Keisha." Trayvon sighed loudly, adopting the condescending corporate tone he used whenever he wanted to sound authoritative. "Look, this wedding is costing $150,000. It is an exclusive, highly curated event. You are just a freelance accountant. You dress like a soccer mom, and you do not understand the circles Chloe and I are moving in. You do not fit the aesthetic we are going for. Your presence is going to throw off the entire vibe." I stood frozen in my kitchen, staring at my son, who was still happily humming and lining up his red cars next to his blue ones. My own brother was telling me that my modest lifestyle was an embarrassment to his fabricated image of wealth. He was banning me from his wedding because I did not wear the right designer labels or carry the right luxury handbags. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of his words, a shrill, agitated voice echoed through the background of the call. It was Chloe, Trayvon's 29-year-old fiancée. Chloe was a white woman from a very wealthy country club family, and she approached her wedding the way a military general approaches a battle. "Tell her the kid cannot come either," Chloe shouted clearly, standing right next to Trayvon. "I am not having that weird flapping and humming in my wedding video. This is going to Southern Bride magazine, Trayvon. I will not have a defective child ruining the aesthetic in the background of my vows. Tell her they both need to stay away." The word defective hit me like a physical punch to the chest. My breath caught in my throat. I looked at Jamal, who had just managed to perfectly align his cars, clapping his hands together in a burst of pure, innocent joy. The idea that this woman who was marrying into a black family, felt comfortable using that kind of dehumanizing language to describe a beautiful neurodivergent black child was sickening. It was deeply racist, incredibly ableist, and utterly vile. I waited for Trayvon to defend his nephew. I waited for my brother to shut her down to demand respect for his own blood. Instead, Trayvon just cleared his throat and spoke directly into the receiver again. "You heard her, Keisha," he said smoothly, completely brushing past the horrific insult. "Jamal is just too unpredictable for an event of this magnitude. He makes those noises and he cannot sit still. It is going to embarrass the family in front of Chloe's parents and their business associates. You both need to sit this one out." The betrayal was so profound that it momentarily robbed me of my voice. But before I could deliver the verbal evisceration Trevin so deeply deserved, there was a rustling sound on the line. Another voice took over the receiver. It was my mother, Brenda. Brenda was 60 years old and spent her entire life managing her image. To her, social standing in her elite circles was more important than oxygen. I felt a tiny flicker of hope, foolishly believing that my mother had overheard Chloe's vile comment and had snatched the phone away to scold Trayvon. "Keisha, you need to be a team player on this," Brenda said, her voice sharp and commanding. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. My own mother was agreeing with them. "Do you have any idea what Chloe's father thinks of us right now?" Brenda continued, her tone dripping with desperation and internalized inferiority. "They are paying for a massive portion of the lifestyle your brother deserves. We have to present an image of flawless excellence. We cannot have you showing up in your plain clothes dragging a child who cannot behave normally. It makes us look bad. It makes us look like we do not belong in these circles. You lack ambition, Keisha. You have always been a social liability. Just take one for the team and stay home so we can get through this weekend without anyone judging our bloodline." The kitchen felt incredibly cold. I was listening to the woman who gave birth to me prioritize the superficial approval of a racist, status-obsessed white family over the dignity of her own daughter and grandson. She was willing to sacrifice us on the altar of high society, just to ensure Trayvon maintained his illusion of success. There were 1,000 things I could have said in that moment. I could have screamed. I could have cried. I could have pointed out the massive, glaring hypocrisy of their so-called flawless excellence. I could have reminded my mother that Trayvon did not actually have a dollar to his name, but doing so would require giving them my emotional energy, and they did not deserve another ounce of my spirit. I looked at my son. Jamal looked back at me, his big brown eyes bright and happy. He offered me a blue toy car, completely oblivious to the fact that his grandmother and uncle had just declared him unfit for society. I took the toy car from his hand, gave him a warm smile, and lifted the phone back to my ear. Message received. I said, my voice absolutely dead of all emotion. I did not wait for a response. I pulled the phone away and ended the call. I stood in the quiet of my kitchen for a long moment, letting the finality of their decision wash over me. They did not want the struggling freelance accountant and her weird kid at their luxurious event. That was perfectly fine, because I was not a struggling freelance accountant. I opened my laptop, pulled it across the granite island, and opened a highly secured private banking portal. 5 years ago, my father Calvin and my brother Trayvon had made a series of catastrophic investments. They had nearly bankrupted my parents and were on the verge of losing everything. To save them from public humiliation and total financial ruin, I had stepped in. I had quietly funneled money into a family trust, creating credit lines that kept them afloat. I paid for Trayvon's luxury SUV. I provided the down payment for his upscale condo. I funded the entire wedding budget, the rehearsal dinner, and the floral arrangements. They thought the money was coming from a generational family trust that Calvin had miraculously salvaged. They had no idea that the trust was entirely funded and legally owned by me, the daughter they viewed as a worthless failure. I was not just doing bookkeeping from my living room. Over the last decade, I had quietly built and grown a massive portfolio, eventually becoming the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar luxury real estate and hospitality firm. I preferred to live modestly, focusing my energy on providing a safe, peaceful, and loving environment for Jamal. I let my family keep their arrogant illusions because it kept them out of my daily life, but their illusions were funded by my reality. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The screen displayed the primary accounts linked to Trayvon, Calvin, and Brenda. I navigated to the security settings. I found the American Express black card that Trayvon used to pay for his custom tuxedo and the extravagant floral deposits. With a single click, I froze the account. I moved to the next card, the one Calvin used to maintain his country club memberships, and the deposits for the rehearsal dinner. I froze that one as well. I went through every single credit line, every checking account, every emergency reserve that had my name legally attached as the primary owner. I froze them all. I systematically dismantled the financial foundation of their entire existence in less than 3 minutes. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. I walked over to the stove, plated the blueberry pancakes, and set them in front of my son. Jamal giggled and dug his fork into the syrup. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea and sat down next to him, feeling a profound sense of peace. No one was ever going to disrespect my child again. My phone was sitting face down on the counter. It remained silent for a long time, but I knew the storm was coming. I knew that in exactly 3 days the luxurious facade they had built would shatter into a million pieces. And I was going to enjoy every single second of the silence until it did. The silence in my kitchen was absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic clacking of Jamal tapping 2 of his favorite toy cars together. The granite island felt cool beneath my fingertips, anchoring me to reality, while the echoes of my family's toxic venom faded into the background. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel the familiar suffocating weight of inadequacy that my mother had spent 3 decades meticulously building inside my chest. Instead, a profound, icy clarity washed over me. I reached across the counter, pulled my silver laptop toward me, and opened the lid. The screen flared to life, casting a pale blue glow over my hands as I navigated to a highly secure private banking portal. They saw me as a dowdy, struggling freelance accountant, a single mother who spent her days balancing spreadsheets for local dry cleaners and corner stores. They believed my modest townhouse and my unassuming sedan were the physical manifestations of my lack of ambition. That was the narrative my mother Brenda peddled to her elite church circles to explain why her daughter did not fit into their rigid, status-obsessed world of Black excellence. But I was not just pushing numbers for small businesses. Over the last decade, I had quietly built, acquired, and scaled a massive portfolio. I was the sole owner and CEO of a multi-million-dollar luxury real estate and hospitality holding firm. I did not just balance the books. I owned the buildings my family desperately wanted to be seen inside. I owned the ground they walked on. My modesty was a deliberate shield to protect my peace, but today my wealth was going to be my sword. I typed in my master credentials, bypassing the 2-factor authentication, and accessed the administrative dashboard of what my father and brother proudly referred to as the Historic Family Trust. There was no historic family trust. It was a complete fabrication, a financial phantom I had created out of thin air to save them from their own staggering arrogance. 5 years ago, my father Calvin and my brother Trayvon had driven the family straight toward the edge of total financial ruin. Calvin had over-leveraged his assets, taking out massive reckless loans to fund a commercial real estate venture he was entirely unqualified to manage. Trayvon, fresh out of his prestigious university and desperate to maintain the illusion of immediate wealth, had co-signed the loans and maxed out multiple credit lines to fund a lifestyle of designer clothes, luxury cars, and exclusive club memberships. The bank was weeks away from foreclosing on my parents' sprawling suburban home. I remember walking into their house and finding my mother sobbing in the formal dining room, not because they were losing their shelter, but because she was terrified the women on her church executive committee would find out they were destitute. The shame of losing their social standing was a fate worse than death to her. I had already made my first millions by then, having quietly sold a proprietary hospitality management software I had coded in my spare time. Instead of watching them drown, I stepped in anonymously. I used a corporate lawyer and a network of impenetrable LLCs to purchase their debt, clear their names, and establish a blind trust that provided them with a monthly allowance and premium credit lines. My lawyer informed Calvin that a long-forgotten generational asset tied to his grandfather's estate had finally matured and was paying out dividends. They never questioned it. Their massive, fragile egos demanded that they belong to old money. They eagerly swallowed the lie because it fit their curated aesthetic. For 5 years, Trayvon had swaggered through Atlanta, acting like a self-made titan of industry, completely oblivious to the fact that his luxury SUV, the down payment on his upscale condo, and his $150,000 wedding budget were entirely funded by the sister he had just banned from the premises. I navigated to the primary accounts linked to Trayvon's name. The screen displayed a list of active credit lines. I clicked on the American Express Centurion card. The limit was essentially non-existent, though I had placed a soft cap on it to monitor his reckless spending. My cursor hovered over the button labeled Suspend Account. The word defective echoed in my mind, ringing with the shrill, entitled pitch of Chloe's voice. I thought about my mother demanding I take one for the team, so a racist, superficial family would not judge their bloodline. I pressed the trackpad. The status icon shifted instantly from a bright active green to a solid dead red. Frozen. A deep, visceral wave of sensory satisfaction rolled through my chest. The click of the mouse was the sound of a guillotine dropping on Trayvon's fake reality. I moved to the next account. This was the commercial processing line Trayvon was using specifically for the wedding vendors. I pulled up the pending transactions. There was a wire transfer scheduled to clear by noon for $75,000. It was the final payment for the extravagant floral arrangements Chloe had demanded, a ridiculous sea of imported white peonies and rare orchids, designed exclusively to make her country club mother swoon. I canceled the wire transfer. The funds were instantly yanked back into my holding account. I scrolled down the list of pending authorizations. 12 imported black luxury sedans were scheduled to pick up Chloe's extended family from the airport and shuttle them to their 5-star hotels. I highlighted the authorization code and revoked it. The catering deposit for the rehearsal dinner, a massive Wagyu beef carving station, and top-tier champagne package meant to impress the in-laws. Revoked. I systematically dismantled the financial foundation of their entire existence brick by expensive brick in less than 4 minutes. Finally, I pulled up Calvin's lifestyle card, the one my father used to buy expensive imported scotch and pay his monthly golf club dues so he could sit in the clubhouse and pretend he was a kingmaker among men. I did not even hesitate. I clicked the button and froze his account too. I severed every single financial cord, tying me to their toxic, ungrateful lives. They wanted to live in a world where I did not exist. I was simply granting them their wish. They were about to find out exactly how cold that world could be when my money was not keeping the lights on. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. The metallic snap of the lid shutting felt like the closing of a heavy vault door. I took a deep, steadying breath and let it out slowly. From the living room, I heard a sudden, joyful burst of sound. Jamal had abandoned his toy cars and was now standing by the window singing the theme song to his favorite animated show. His voice was bright, entirely off-key, and completely beautiful. He spun in a small circle, his hands flapping by his sides, in a pure, uninhibited expression of happiness. He was completely unaware of the cruelty that had just been hurled at him through a cell phone speaker. He was safe in the world I had built for him. I walked out from behind the kitchen island and leaned against the doorframe watching him spin. A fierce, overwhelming maternal vow cemented itself in my heart. No one was ever going to look at my son and see a liability again. No one was ever going to use the word defective in relation to his brilliant, beautiful mind. And absolutely no one was ever going to treat us like an embarrassing secret while secretly feeding off the fruits of my labor. I would burn their entire social standing to the ground before I let them shed another drop of disrespect on my child. Suddenly, the phone on the kitchen counter vibrated violently against the granite. The screen lit up, illuminating the dim corner of the kitchen. I walked back over and looked down at the display. It was a frantic, rapid-fire series of text messages from Trayvon. Why is the card declining at the florist? Call me now. Chloe is crying. Call the bank. Keisha, pick up the phone right now. I stared at the glowing letters, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. The panic was bleeding through the screen. He was standing in some high-end floral boutique, dressed in designer clothes I paid for, realizing that his black card was suddenly functioning like a piece of worthless plastic. The golden child was experiencing his first taste of actual reality. I did not reach for the phone. I reached over, tapped the volume rocker to switch the device to complete silence, and slipped it into my pocket. I turned my back on the counter, walked into the living room, and scooped my son up into my arms, making him squeal with delight as I told him we were going out for a massive scoop of artisanal ice cream. The afternoon sun hit the pavement of the outdoor promenade, casting a warm golden light over everything. I walked hand in hand with Jamal toward an artisanal creamery in the heart of Buckhead. The heavy scent of freshly toasted waffle cones and caramelized brown butter wrapped around us the second I pushed open the thick glass door. Jamal immediately let go of my hand to stand in front of the massive, brightly lit display case. His eyes widened, tracking the vibrant swirls of blackberry compote, Madagascar vanilla, and roasted pistachio. He began a soft, rhythmic hum, his hands flapping in tight, excited bursts against his sides. To the rest of the world, and specifically to my family, this display of pure joy was deemed inappropriate. In my mother's rigid status, obsessed circles, a child was supposed to be a quiet, perfect accessory. You were supposed to dress them in uncomfortable designer clothes and parade them around alumni mixers and Sunday morning church services to prove the undeniable success of your bloodline. To Chloe and Trayvon, Jamal was a defect that threatened to ruin their carefully curated high society wedding aesthetic. They viewed his neurodivergence as a personal affront to their relentless pursuit of Black excellence. But to me, his humming was the sound of my son existing safely in his own skin. I ordered him a double scoop of the brightest blue cotton candy flavor they had, topped with an excessive amount of rainbow sprinkles. We took our bowls to a small wrought iron table outside on the patio. I watched him carefully arrange his 2 plastic spoons perfectly parallel to his napkins before taking his first bite. He gave a sharp, happy nod. My heart swelled with a fierce, unapologetic protective instinct. I would burn my entire bloodline to the ground before I ever allowed them to make him feel small again. Inside my leather handbag, my phone vibrated with the intensity of a trapped hornet. It buzzed against my wallet, paused for a fraction of a second, and then began rattling all over again. I took another slow, deliberate bite of my salted caramel gelato, savoring the rich, complex sweetness before reaching into my bag. The lock screen was a chaotic waterfall of frantic notifications. 5 missed calls from Trayvon, 8 missed calls from Brenda. A barrage of text messages stacked one on top of the other, each one more unhinged than the last. I opened the thread from my brother. His panic leaped off the digital screen. Why is the card declining at the florist? Call me now. Chloe is crying. I stared at the bright white letters. The sheer audacity of his demand was almost poetic in its delusion. Less than an hour ago, he had confidently banished me from his presence, treating me like a dirty secret that needed to be swept under the rug so he could play the role of an old money heir for his white country club in-laws. Now, standing in front of a luxury florist, surrounded by thousands of imported white peonies and rare orchids, his facade was collapsing. He expected me to answer the phone, apologize for the inconvenience, and magically restore the flow of cash that fueled his fake empire. He actually believed that my financial subservience was an inescapable law of nature. He thought he could slap me in the face and then hold out his hand for a blank check. Another text materialized on the screen, this one from my mother. Keisha, call the bank immediately. We are standing in the floral boutique and Trayvon looks like a fool. You are ruining your brother's big day. Fix this glitch right now. I read her words twice, letting the full weight of her entitlement wash over me. Brenda knew exactly where that money came from. She knew there was no magical generational trust fund. She knew her daughter, the one she constantly belittled for lacking ambition, was the only reason she was not living in a cramped apartment fighting off debt collectors. Yet she still spoke to me like I was the hired help. In her mind, my wealth was simply a resource meant to be harvested for the benefit of her golden son. I was the workhorse. Trayvon was the show pony. That was the dynamic she had enforced since we were children, and she fully expected me to maintain it even while being publicly degraded. I watched Jamal scoop up a pile of sprinkles completely untroubled by the storm brewing across town. I did not text Trayvon back. I did not call my mother to reassure her that the family image would be preserved. I calmly tapped the screen, navigated to my settings, and switched the phone to Do Not Disturb. The sudden cessation of the vibrations felt like a heavy physical weight lifting directly off my chest. For the first time in 5 years, my money and my peace belonged exclusively to me. But total silence was not the goal. I navigated to my messages and pinned the conversation with Tasha to the top of my screen, allowing her notifications to bypass the block I had just placed on the rest of the world. Tasha was not just my best friend. She was my sister in every way that mattered. We had met freshman year at Spelman College, bonding over late-night study sessions and shared ambitions. While my biological family viewed me as a social liability, Tasha saw my brilliance. Now she served as the public-facing manager of the venue holding my brother's wedding, the Grand Magnolia. The Grand Magnolia was the crown jewel of my real estate portfolio. I had purchased the historic Atlanta estate 3 years ago, gutting it and meticulously restoring it into the premier luxury event space for the Southern elite. It featured sweeping mahogany staircases, massive crystal chandeliers, and acres of manicured botanical gardens. Trayvon had chosen it specifically because it was the most expensive, exclusive venue in the city, desperate to prove his financial dominance to Chloe's wealthy parents. What he did not know, what absolutely no one in my family knew, was that Tasha was not the owner. She ran the day-to-day operations of my most profitable hospitality asset, expertly shielding my identity from the socialites who rented the space. She was the general on the front lines of my empire, and right now she had a front-row seat to the destruction of Trayvon's ego. A new text from Tasha popped onto my screen. "Girl, your brother is at my front desk screaming at his bank on speakerphone. What did you do?" I chuckled softly, the sound carrying across the sunlit patio. I could picture the scene perfectly. Trayvon standing in the opulent marble-floored lobby of my historic estate, sweating through his custom-tailored designer suit. He would be using his loudest, most authoritative junior executive voice, trying to intimidate some minimum-wage customer service representative at American Express. Chloe would be hovering nearby, hyperventilating into a designer tissue, terrified that her perfectly pitched bridal aesthetic was evaporating into thin air. Trayvon would be desperately trying to project the image of a wealthy patriarch, dealing with a minor administrative error, all while his internal panic skyrocketed. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of absolute financial control, and the floor was rapidly giving way beneath his feet. I rested my elbows on the wrought iron table, typing my response with slow, deliberate precision. I stopped paying for my own disrespect. I hit send and watched the little delivery bubble confirm the message. A profound sense of liberation washed over me, sweeter than the gelato I had just finished. I was no longer the quiet enabler hiding in the shadows to protect the pride of people who despised me. I was the architect of their reality, and I had just demolished the foundation. Tasha's reply came through almost instantly. "Oh, it is about to get ugly. Your mom is marching toward my office right now." I locked my phone and slid it back into my bag. I smiled at my son, asked him if he wanted another scoop of cotton candy ice cream, and felt absolutely nothing but anticipation for the fire I had just ignited. By Thursday evening, the silence in my townhouse was a living, breathing comfort. The storm of notifications on my phone had eventually ceased, likely because Trayvon had exhausted his vocabulary of threats and demands. I was sitting on the living room rug with Jamal, helping him sort the edge pieces of a 500-piece solar system puzzle. The soft clack of the cardboard pieces snapping together was the only sound in the room. Jamal was deeply focused, his small fingers tracing the rings of Saturn, his face, a portrait of absolute peace. That peace shattered the moment violent, heavy pounding hit my front door. The wood rattled in its frame. Jamal flinched, dropping a puzzle piece and pressing his hands over his ears. I immediately stood up, my maternal instincts flaring into high alert. I gently touched Jamal's shoulder, signaling for him to put on his noise-canceling headphones resting on the coffee table. Once he slipped them over his ears and gave me a thumbs up, I marched toward the entryway. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Trayvon and my mother pushed their way inside before I could even utter a greeting, bringing a tidal wave of chaotic, frantic energy right into my sanctuary. Trayvon looked entirely unhinged. He was still wearing his bespoke charcoal suit from work, but the silk tie was yanked loose, and he was sweating profusely, dark patches blooming under his arms. The polished, arrogant junior executive who had banned me from his wedding just 2 days prior was completely gone. In his place stood a panicking, desperate man whose entire fabricated reality was actively collapsing. My mother Brenda marched in right behind him. The heavy, suffocating scent of her expensive floral perfume instantly filled my hallway. She was clutching a Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag, a bag I specifically remembered paying for 2 Christmases ago, when she claimed the family trust had generated a holiday surplus. Her face was set in a tight, furious mask, her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. "Get on your laptop right now," Trayvon demanded, his voice cracking as he paced across my hardwood floor. "Call the trust administrators. Call the bank. Call whoever you have to call. Every single account is frozen." I closed the front door slowly, making sure the latch clicked into place. I leaned against the heavy wood and crossed my arms, observing them with absolute detachment. "What are you talking about, Trayvon? Do not play stupid with me," he shouted, dragging a hand down his sweating face. "The American Express declined at the florist on Tuesday. I thought it was a security flag for a large purchase. But then the Visa declined at the luxury auto rental. The catering company called me an hour ago to say the wire transfer for the rehearsal dinner bounced. Every card with the family trust name on it is entirely locked out." Brenda stepped forward, snapping her manicured fingers in the air as if trying to wake a disobedient servant. "Stop standing there staring at us and fix the glitch, Keisha. You are the accountant. You manage the administrative side of the trust. You have all the login portals and the direct lines to the bank managers. Do your job and get those holds lifted immediately." I looked at my mother. The sheer entitlement radiating from her was staggering. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask how her grandson was doing. She marched into my home after participating in one of the most degrading phone calls of my life and demanded I perform administrative labor to save her social standing. She fundamentally believed that my only purpose on this earth was to facilitate her access to wealth. "Do you have any idea what Chloe's father thinks of us right now?" Brenda continued, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "They are a prominent country club family. They expect a certain level of black excellence from us. We are supposed to be splitting the cost of this wedding to show we are their financial equals." Trayvon had to stand at the florist's desk and hand over a piece of useless plastic while Chloe cried in the corner. "We look like absolute beggars. Fix it, Keisha." I pushed off the door and walked past them, heading straight for my open kitchen. I did not rush. I moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who held all the cards. I opened the cabinet, retrieved my favorite ceramic mug, and placed a chamomile tea bag inside. "I am afraid I cannot help you," I said smoothly, turning on the electric kettle. The water began to hum and bubble. "What do you mean you cannot help?" Trayvon snapped, following me into the kitchen and slamming his hands down on my granite island. "You handle all the paperwork for Dad. You are the only one who knows how to navigate the banking portal. Call the fraud department and verify the purchases." I leaned against the counter, meeting his panicked gaze. Why on earth would I spend my Thursday evening sitting on hold with a fraud department to verify purchases for a wedding I am banned from attending? Trayvon's mouth fell open. He looked genuinely shocked that I would dare bring up his own actions. Brenda gasped, clutching her Birkin bag to her chest like a shield. "You are punishing your brother because you cannot be a team player." Brenda scolded, her tone dripping with toxic disappointment. "You are throwing a childish tantrum over a guest list. I told you on Tuesday Chloe's family has a very specific aesthetic. You are a single mother who refuses to dress for the occasion, and your child cannot behave in formal settings. You are being entirely selfish. I poured the boiling water into my mug. The fragrant steam rose into the air between us. I looked my mother directly in the eyes. Her aesthetic required calling my 8-year-old son a defective weirdo, and your team player mentality required you to stand by and agree with her. So no, mother. I am not throwing a tantrum. I am simply enforcing a boundary. Since Jamal and I are such massive social liabilities, I have officially resigned from doing any unpaid financial labor for this family. You and Trayvon are so excellent, you can figure out how to call a 1-800 number and fix your own bank glitches. Trevin let out a harsh, bitter laugh. He stepped away from the island, shaking his head, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated arrogance. The desperation briefly gave way to the deeply ingrained superiority complex my parents had fed him since birth. "You are so bitter," Trevon sneered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You have always been bitter. You sit in this boring little townhouse crunching numbers for pennies, completely jealous of the fact that I am actually making something of myself. You hate that I am marrying into a top-tier family. You hate my success. You hate my black excellence because you are nothing but a broke, miserable single mother who cannot keep a man." I took a slow sip of my chamomile tea. The irony of his words was so rich it was almost tangible. He was standing in front of the sole funder of his entire fake reality, calling me broke. He was a man drowning in imaginary success, totally unaware that the oxygen tank he was breathing from was registered in my name. I let the silence stretch, allowing his pathetic insults to hang heavily in the air, completely stripping them of any power. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. Trevin leaned over the island, his eyes narrowed, his breath coming in ragged bursts. "The rehearsal dinner is tomorrow night at prime time. My father-in-law invited 12 of his biggest corporate investors. If those credit lines are not active by the time the bill comes to the table, I will make sure Dad cuts you out of the family entirely. You will not see a dime of the trust when he passes. You fix this by tomorrow night, or you are dead to me." I set my ceramic mug down on the counter. The soft clink echoed through the kitchen. I looked at my brother, taking in his sweat-stained collar and his hollow threats. I smiled a genuine, terrifyingly bright smile. "Promise." The front door slammed so hard the framed artwork in the hallway rattled against the drywall. Trayvon was gone, sprinting back to his rented luxury sedan to desperately put out the fires consuming his fabricated empire. But the heavy, suffocating scent of Himalayan crocodile leather and excessive floral perfume remained. My mother had not moved. She stood perfectly still in the center of my kitchen, her eyes tracking my every movement as I took another slow sip of my chamomile tea. The frantic, commanding matriarch who had barged into my home minutes ago was actively recalibrating. I could see the gears turning behind her perfectly manicured exterior. The aggressive approach had failed to move me. Trayvon's screaming had achieved nothing but highlighting his own pathetic lack of control, so Brenda pivoted to her secondary weapon. It was time for the emotional warfare. She sighed, a long, practiced sound designed to convey deep maternal exhaustion. She let her shoulders drop a fraction of an inch, adopting a posture of profound sorrow. "Keisha, look at what you are doing," Brenda said, her voice dropping an octave into a soft, patronizing purr. "Look at how you are tearing this family apart over a simple misunderstanding." I did not interrupt her. I set my mug down on the granite island and let her spin her toxic web. "Your brother is under an immense amount of pressure right now," she continued, taking a slow step toward me. "Chloe's family is very traditional. They have immense expectations, and we have an obligation to meet them. We have always protected you, Keisha, even when you made it incredibly difficult for us to do so. We have always shielded you from the consequences of your own actions." She placed her hands flat on the counter, leaning in to deliver the killing blow she thought would bring me to my knees. "Have you completely forgotten how much grace we showed you?" she asked, her voice gaining a slight calculated tremble. "When you got pregnant with Jamal out of wedlock, living in that tiny, depressing apartment downtown. Do you have any idea the absolute humiliation I endured because of your choices? I was the chair of the Women's Executive Committee at First Mount Zion. I had to sit in those front pews every single Sunday while the entire congregation whispered behind their hymnals about my daughter's shameful indiscretions. My reputation in the community was in tatters. We could have cast you out completely. Your father wanted to cut all ties, but I begged him not to. We loved you through your shame. We gave you grace. And this is how you repay us, by throwing a petty, jealous tantrum and refusing to make a simple phone call when your brother needs you the most. The kitchen felt unnaturally quiet. From the living room, I could barely hear the faint, muffled sound of Jamal happily snapping puzzle pieces together, completely insulated from the poison radiating from the woman standing in front of me. The absolute delusion required for Brenda to rewrite history so brazenly was staggering. Grace. I repeated, tasting the word on my tongue. You showed me grace. I looked her directly in the eyes, permanently stripping away decades of conditioned submission. Let us talk about your grace, Brenda. When I was 7 months pregnant and my blood pressure spiked so dangerously high the doctors threatened to induce early, I called you from the emergency room. I was terrified. I was alone. Do you remember what you said to me? Brenda shifted her weight, breaking eye contact for a fraction of a second. She did not answer. You told me that you could not come to the hospital because Pastor Williams and his wife were coming over for a formal dinner, and my medical emergency would be a terrible conversational distraction. I said, my voice eerily calm, void of the tears she so desperately wanted to see. You told me to take a cab home so nobody from the church would accidentally see your car parked outside the public maternity ward. I leaned across the island, closing the distance between us, forcing her to look at me. When Jamal was diagnosed with autism, you did not offer a single ounce of support. You told me his neurodivergence was a direct punishment from God for having a child outside of a sanctified marriage. You demanded I stop bringing him to Sunday service because his humming disrupted your precious prayer circle. You explicitly cropped us out of the family Christmas card for 3 consecutive years because a single mother and a neurodivergent child ruined your flawless high society aesthetic. Do not ever stand in my home and talk to me about grace. You have never loved me through my shame. You have only ever viewed my existence as a threat to your social climbing. Brenda's face flushed a deep, mottled red. The soft, patronizing mother act vanished instantly, replaced by the vicious, cornered narcissist I had spent my entire life trying to appease. Her hands gripped the handles of her designer bag until her knuckles turned white. "How dare you speak to me that way?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with pure venom. "You are an ungrateful, bitter woman. We gave you everything. We provided you with a world-class education, a roof over your head, and a name that carries weight in this city. You squandered it all. You chose to live this mediocre, unremarkable life, while your brother actually made something of himself." She stood as tall as her frame would allow, projecting every ounce of her fabricated superiority. She was preparing to drop the ultimate trump card, the final threat that always kept the extended family falling in line. "If you do not fix your brother's accounts by tomorrow morning, there will be permanent consequences," Keisha Brenda commanded. "Your father and I have been discussing the family trust, the generational assets. We are currently finalizing the revisions to Calvin's will." She paused, letting the threat hang heavily in the air, expecting me to cower at the thought of losing my financial inheritance. "Trevon is positioned to inherit the primary estate and the investment portfolios." She continued, her chin raised. "We had carved out a modest provision for you, a small safety net, to ensure Jamal is cared for when your freelance business inevitably fails. But if you ruin this wedding, I will have your father erase your name from that document entirely. You will not see a single dime of our wealth. You will be cut off legally and financially forever." For a long moment, the kitchen was dead silent. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. She was using a phantom fortune to threaten me. She was using a fortune that I personally generated, managed, and quietly deposited into her checking account every single month as a weapon to force my submission. She believed she held the keys to the kingdom, completely unaware that she was standing inside a castle I built from the ground up. The profound, staggering irony of it bubbled up in my chest. I laughed. It started as a soft chuckle and grew into a genuine, full-throated laugh. I threw my head back, the sound echoing off the high ceilings of my townhouse. It was the laugh of a woman who had just realized the monster under her bed was nothing but a shadow. It was the sound of absolute, unbreakable freedom. Brenda took a step back, her expression twisting into a mask of pure confusion and outrage. "Are you laughing at me? You think your father's legacy is a joke?" "I think it is the funniest joke I have heard in my entire life," I said, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of my eye. I looked at her, my smile bright and terrifyingly sharp. "Go ahead, Brenda. Cut me out. Call the lawyers tomorrow morning and remove my name from every single piece of paper. Tell Calvin to strike me from the royal lineage. I absolutely insist upon it." Brenda's mouth opened and closed. She had no script for this. Her ultimate weapon, the threat of total financial ruin, had just bounced off me like a rubber bullet. She had expected begging. She had expected tears. She had expected me to scramble for my phone to appease her and restore order. Finding nothing but my absolute amusement, she retreated to her only remaining defense mechanism: righteous indignation. "You are sick," she spat, turning on her heel toward the front door. "You are completely delusional. When you are drowning in debt and this little accounting gig dries up, do not come crying to us. You will regret this, Keisha. I promise you, you will deeply regret this." She yanked the front door open and marched out into the night. The sharp click of her designer heels faded down the concrete walkway. I stood in the doorway and watched her luxury sedan pull away from the curb, disappearing into the dark suburban streets. I closed the heavy wooden door and slid the deadbolt firmly into place. The physical lock engaging was a deeply satisfying sound. I walked back to the kitchen and retrieved my silver laptop from the counter. I opened it, the screen instantly illuminating the banking portal I had left active. Trayvon's accounts were still glowing a solid dead red. But suspending the cards was only a temporary measure. It was time for a permanent solution. I navigated to the master administrative settings of the trust account. I scrolled down the interface to the authorized users list. I found Trayvon's name, clicked the settings gear, and selected the option to permanently revoke all user privileges and sever his name from the master account. A warning dialog box popped up on the screen, asking me to confirm the permanent deletion of the authorized user. I pressed confirm without a single second of hesitation. Friday night arrived with the kind of profound, undisturbed tranquility that I had not experienced in years. The heavy, oppressive energy my mother had dragged into my home the night before was completely gone, banished the moment I permanently severed Trayvon's access to the family trust. I was curled up on the plush velvet sofa in my living room, wearing a pair of soft cashmere lounge pants, a freshly steeped mug of chamomile and lavender tea resting on the coaster beside me. Upstairs, Jamal was fast asleep, his breathing a steady, comforting rhythm. Downstairs, my phone was serving as a direct broadcast to the greatest show on earth. Tasha was not just the general manager of my luxury estate, the Grand Magnolia. She also owned the elite high-end catering and event coordination firm that serviced the wealthiest zip codes in Atlanta. Trayvon had booked her firm to manage the logistics of his rehearsal dinner at the Sterling Prime, a notoriously exclusive dimly lit steakhouse in Buckhead, where the minimum private room spend was 5 figures. Tasha was personally overseeing the event, standing quietly by the mahogany bar, wearing her discreet earpiece, and sending me a relentless, highly detailed play-by-play. My phone screen illuminated the dark room, vibrating with a rapid succession of text messages. "Girl, he is putting on a performance," Tasha texted. "He just ordered 4 bottles of the 2010 vintage Bordeaux. 2,000 a pop. Chloe's parents are sitting across from him, looking like they are inspecting a zoo exhibit." I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the warmth. I could picture the scene with absolute clarity. Trayvon sitting at the head of a massive polished oak table flanked by 40 of Atlanta and Connecticut's most obnoxious socialites. He would be using his booming executive voice, swirling his wineglass, desperately projecting the image of a man whose financial foundation was made of solid granite. He was performing black excellence for a white audience that had already decided he was barely tolerable. Another message popped up. "The Worthingtons are literally looking down their noses at your parents. Your mom is wearing so much diamonds she looks like a chandelier." Trayvon just ordered the A5 Wagyu tomahawks for the entire bridal party. I smiled, setting my mug down. Trayvon was doubling down on the illusion, completely unaware that his safety net was currently sitting on a sofa in a modest townhouse watching him freefall. For the next 2 hours, my phone buzzed with descriptions of a lavish, gluttonous feast. Tasha narrated the arrival of truffle butter, mashed potatoes, towering seafood towers, overflowing with Maine lobster and king crab, and endless rounds of top-tier champagne. Trayvon was hosting the dinner of a lifetime, acting as the benevolent, ultra-wealthy patriarch of his new elite circle. Then at exactly 9:45, the tone of Tasha's messages shifted. The text bubbles stopped, replaced by an incoming voice note. I tapped play, holding the phone close to my ear. Keisha. Tasha whispered, her voice tight with suppressed laughter and rising tension, the clinking of fine crystal and low chatter echoing in the background. The server just dropped the leather folio on the table. The bill is $15,420. Trayvon did not even look at it. He just casually tossed that black American Express card onto the tray without breaking eye contact with Chloe's father. The server took it to the back terminal. I am standing right next to the POS system. The screen just flashed red. Code 05, do not honor. A shiver of pure, unadulterated satisfaction ran down my spine. A second voice note arrived a minute later. The floor manager just went over to the table. He leaned down and whispered in Trayvon's ear, "You should have seen your brother's face. All the blood just drained out of his head. He looks like he saw a ghost." He gave the manager a tight fake smile and handed him a different card. The Visa signature. The manager walked it back, declined. I leaned back against the sofa cushion, staring at the ceiling. The walls were closing in on him. The perfectly constructed facade was fracturing in front of an audience of 40 judgmental millionaires. The text started rolling in like rapid-fire artillery. He is sweating, literally wiping his forehead with a linen napkin. He just handed the manager a third card, a basic debit card, declined for insufficient funds. The waitstaff is starting to hover. The floor manager is standing at the edge of the private room holding the folio, looking firm. The whispers are starting. The Worthingtons have stopped talking. They are just staring at Trayvon. I could practically smell the panic. Trayvon was trapped in a luxury dining room, suffocating under the weight of a $15,000 tab, stripped of the invisible armor I had provided him for half a decade. But I knew exactly what would happen next. The cavalry would attempt a rescue. "Here comes your dad," Tasha texted. "Calvin, the patriarch of the fake family." Trust the man who spent his afternoons smoking cigars at the country club and lecturing me about my lack of ambition. I knew Calvin could not stand watching his son flounder in front of his wealthy new in-laws. His ego would demand that he step in, pull out his platinum card, and demonstrate the robust generational wealth of our bloodline. A new voice note popped onto the screen. I tapped it immediately. "Girl, it is a complete tragedy," Tasha reported, her voice hushed but vibrating with shock. "Your dad just puffed out his chest, gave Chloe's father this condescending little chuckle, and pulled out his platinum card. He told the manager to put the entire evening on his tab, acting like 15 grand was pocket change. The manager ran it. I watched the screen. Declined. Fraud lock. Calvin tried a second card. Declined. Your dad's hands are actually shaking. He is staring at the plastic like it betrayed him." I closed my eyes, letting out a long, slow breath. The twin pillars of arrogance in my family had just publicly crumbled. They had spent their entire lives treating me like a peasant, completely oblivious to the fact that they were dining on my dime. The updates grew increasingly chaotic. Chloe just figured it out. She turned bright red. She just knocked her chair over, pushed past the server, and ran to the bathroom. The powder room attendant just radioed me. "Chloe is in stall number 3, sobbing hysterically. Brenda is sitting frozen. She looks like she is in a catatonic state." Then came the final devastating blow. The moment I knew would break Calvin's spirit permanently. "Keisha, you are not going to believe this. The manager told them they need to clear the balance right now, or he is calling the police for theft of services." Your dad just stood up. He walked over to Arthur Worthington. He had to pull Chloe's father away from the table. He is whispering to him. He is asking Arthur to cover the bill. I sat straight up. Calvin, a man whose pride was as fragile as glass and as large as a mountain, was standing in a high-end steakhouse begging the White Country Club elite to pay for the dinner his son had bragged about hosting. The ultimate humiliation. The ultimate stripping of dignity. The Worthingtons, a family that already viewed us with barely concealed disdain, were now reaching into their own pockets to rescue the men who had spent the entire evening acting superior. It was a flawless poetic execution of reality. I waited for the fallout. The dinner was over. The damage was done, and the social standing my mother so desperately worshipped was currently lying in ashes on the floor of a Buckhead steakhouse. But the nightmare was far from over. The dinner was merely a symptom of the disease. The cure was coming tomorrow. My phone screen went dark for 10 minutes. The silence stretched thick and heavy. I was just about to set the phone down and check on Jamal when the screen lit up with one final urgent voice note from Tasha. I pressed play. The background noise of the restaurant was gone, replaced by the quiet echo of Tasha's private office. Keisha, the Worthingtons paid the bill. It was the most awkward, painful thing I have ever witnessed. They practically dragged Chloe out of the bathroom and left, but your brother did not leave. He waited until everyone was gone and he just cornered me in my office. Tasha paused, taking a deep breath. He is terrified, Keisha. He is hyperventilating, because the rehearsal dinner is nothing compared to the venue. The Grand Magnolia still has not received the final $80,000 wire transfer for tomorrow's ceremony. I told him our corporate policy is strict, no funds by morning, no wedding. He grabbed my arm. He swore on his actual life that he would have the wire cleared by 9 a.m. tomorrow. He begged me. He literally said, please tell the venue owner that I am good for it. Tell the owner I will get them every single penny. Keisha, he is begging the venue owner for his life. He doesn't even know. Tasha's voice dropped to an odd, disbelieving whisper. He doesn't even know the venue owner is you. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the silence of my townhouse wrapping around me like a warm blanket. The man who had banned me from his wedding for not fitting his aesthetic was currently begging me to let him walk down the aisle. I did not type a response. I just smiled, watching the screen fade to black. Tomorrow was going to be the most beautiful day of my life. The digital clock on my microwave shifted from 6:59 to 7 a.m., the bright green numbers casting a faint glow across the dark granite of my kitchen island. Saturday morning had arrived, bringing with it a profound, undisturbed tranquility that I had not felt in years. Upstairs, Jamal was fast asleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady, comforting rhythm. Downstairs, I was quietly brewing a pot of dark roast coffee, breathing in the rich, earthy aroma, and waiting for the final act of my family's self-destruction to commence. I did not have to wait long. The pounding on my front door was heavy, erratic, and utterly devoid of basic human respect. The wood rattled violently within its frame, threatening to wake the entire townhouse complex. I set my coffee mug down, tightened the belt of my silk robe, and walked toward the entryway. I checked the digital security monitor mounted on the wall. Calvin was standing on my porch. My father, the man who spent his afternoons smoking imported cigars at the country club and lecturing me on my lack of ambition, looked like a hollowed-out shell of a human being. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Calvin did not wait for an invitation. He pushed his way past me, bringing the stale, suffocating scent of dried sweat, old scotch, and sheer panic directly into my sanctuary. I closed the door slowly, ensuring the latch clicked securely into place, and turned to face him. The physical deterioration of my father over a single 12-hour period was staggering. He was still wearing the custom-tailored tuxedo he had worn to the rehearsal dinner, but the bow tie was gone. The collar of his crisp white shirt was unbuttoned and stained, and his usually immaculate face was shadowed with gray stubble. His hands, which usually gripped a golf club with supreme authority, were trembling violently at his sides. "Keisha, we have a catastrophic emergency." Calvin rasped, his voice rough and devoid of its usual booming, patriarchal cadence. He began pacing the length of my hallway, his dress shoes scuffing against the polished hardwood. "The bank has made a massive, unforgivable error. Every single account tied to the family trust has been frozen. Every premium card, every commercial credit line completely locked out. I did not offer him a seat. I did not offer him a glass of water. I simply leaned against the wall and watched him unravel. It was a bloodbath last night, he continued, dragging a trembling hand down his face. Arthur Worthington invited 12 of his largest corporate investors to the rehearsal dinner. Trevon's card declined in front of the entire room. When I tried to intervene and put the balance on my platinum account, the terminal rejected me. I had to pull Arthur aside and beg him to cover a $15,000 tab. Chloe was sobbing in the restroom. The Worthingtons looked at us like we were common criminals who had snuck in through the service entrance. It was the most humiliating moment of my entire life. He stopped pacing and turned toward me, his eyes wide with a desperate pleading intensity. You have to log into the administrative portal right now, Keisha. You have all the routing numbers and the direct lines to the trust managers. You have to call the fraud department and clear these holds. We are completely out of time. Trayvon promised the manager at the Grand Magnolia that he would wire $80,000 by 9 o'clock this morning. If that money does not hit their account, they are going to cancel the wedding. They are going to lock the gates and turn the guests away. I crossed my arms over my chest, maintaining my absolute icy composure. I am not calling anyone Dad. Calvin blinked as if the words I had just spoken were in a foreign language. What are you talking about? This is not a request, Keisha. Your brother's entire future is hanging by a thread. The Worthington family will publicly crucify us if this wedding does not happen. I pushed off the wall and took a slow step toward him. His future is not my responsibility. You all made that perfectly clear on Tuesday morning. You sat on a phone call while your wife and your future daughter-in-law called my son a defective embarrassment. You actively agreed that Jamal and I were social liabilities who did not fit the pristine high society aesthetic you are so desperate to project. You banished us from your social circles to protect your fabricated image of black excellence. Calvin waved his hand in the air, a sharp, dismissive gesture. That was Chloe being an emotional, high-strung bride. You know how women get before a wedding. Brenda was just trying to keep the peace. This is family business, Keisha. You do not abandon your blood over a petty, overly sensitive misunderstanding. You swallow your pride and you do your job. It was not a misunderstanding, I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. It was a revelation. You only value my existence when you can extract free labor from me to maintain the illusion of your wealth. Since my child and I are banned from the premises, my services as your financial savior are permanently terminated. You are the patriarch of this family. Figure out how to pay for your own son's wedding. The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. I watched the desperation completely evaporate from my father's face. The broken, pleading old man vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating narcissist who had ruled our family through fear and intimidation for 3 decades. His posture straightened. His eyes turned flat and reptilian. He realized that emotional manipulation and appeals to family loyalty were completely useless against me. Calvin reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick manila folder, and walked past me into the kitchen. He dropped the folder onto the granite island with a loud, authoritative smack. "Sign it," he demanded, his voice returning to its usual commanding resonance. I walked into the kitchen, looking down at the stack of legal documents spilling out of the folder. I could clearly see the bold, capitalized letters across the top of the first page. It was a quitclaim deed accompanied by an expedited commercial liquidation agreement. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "This is your contribution to the family," Calvin sneered, resting his hands flat on the island. 5 years ago, when you thought you were just playing with your little startup money, I needed actual capital to keep my real estate ventures afloat. You had significant equity in this townhouse. I had a lawyer friend of mine draft a comprehensive power of attorney. You were supposedly out of town on business, so I graciously signed the paperwork on your behalf. My breath hitched in my throat, though I fought to keep my face completely impassive. My own father had committed felony identity fraud to leverage my home. I took out a massive second mortgage on this property. Calvin continued, a sick, victorious smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The balloon payment is due next month, and the bank is threatening to initiate foreclosure. But I have a private buyer willing to pay cash today to acquire the property, cover the outstanding debts, and leave us with exactly enough liquid capital to wire the $80,000 to the Grand Magnolia. He tapped a thick manicured finger against the signature line of the quitclaim deed. The title company flagged the original power of attorney during their final review yesterday afternoon. Calvin explained, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute malice. They require your physical notarized signature on these closing documents to release the funds. A mobile notary is sitting in a car at the end of your street right now waiting for my signal. You are going to sign this property over the wire, will hit my account by 8:30, and Trayvon gets his wedding. I stared at the man standing across from me. The staggering, breathtaking audacity of his demand was almost difficult to process. He had stolen my identity. He had secretly leveraged the roof over his grandson's head to fund his own reckless ego. And now, he was actively attempting to blackmail me into finalizing the sale of my own home so he could pay the $80,000 venue fee. The profound, glorious irony of the situation settled deep into my bones. Calvin was threatening to render me homeless so he could urgently wire $80,000 directly into a corporate bank account that I legally owned. He was begging to hand me my own money. And if I refused to sign away my home, I asked, tilting my head slightly. Calvin laughed, a cold, harsh sound that held no humor. If you refuse, the bank seizes this townhouse anyway, and you and that weird kid of yours are out on the street by the end of the month. I will go down for fraud, but I promise you, I will take you down with me. I will tell the federal investigators that you knew about the second mortgage all along. I will testify that you were a willing co-conspirator who helped me defraud the bank to fund your own lifestyle. You will lose your accounting business, your freedom, and your child. He leaned across the granite island, his face inches from mine, his breath reeking of stale alcohol. You have always been a bitter, jealous disappointment, Keisha. You hate my success. You hate your brother's black excellence because you are nothing but a broke, unremarkable failure who cannot even keep a man. You are nothing without the protection of this family name. Sign the paper. If those cards are not active, and that wire is not sent by 9 o'clock this morning, you are entirely dead to me. I looked down at the fraudulent documents, then back up into the arrogant, sneering face of the man who had tormented me my entire life. I let a slow, terrifyingly bright smile spread across my face. Promise. Calvin stared at me, the arrogant sneer on his face, faltering for a fraction of a second. My bright, terrifying smile had completely derailed his script. He was expecting me to drop to my knees in panic. He was expecting the broken, desperate girl he and my mother had spent decades trying to mold into submission. He was expecting me to scramble for a pen to sign away my sanctuary just to earn his fleeting conditional approval. He slammed his hand down on the granite island, the sharp crack echoing through the quiet kitchen. "Are you insane, Keisha?" He barked, his voice rising in volume as he tried to regain control of the room. "Did you not hear a single word I just said? I am talking about your home. I am talking about putting you and your defective child out on the street. You sign this document right now or I swear to God I will ruin you." I heard every single word, I replied smoothly. I turned my back on him and walked out of the kitchen, heading toward the small home office tucked beneath the staircase. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who held every single card in the deck. The absolute silence from the kitchen told me Calvin was frozen in place, utterly bewildered by my lack of compliance. I walked into the office, opened the heavy, fireproof safe hidden beneath my mahogany desk, and retrieved a sleek black leather portfolio. It was heavy, packed with years of meticulously gathered evidence. I carried it back out to the kitchen and dropped it onto the island, right on top of his fraudulent, desperate quitclaim deed. "You are incredibly predictable, Calvin," I said, deliberately using his first name to sever whatever remaining illusion of fatherhood existed between us. "You have always believed you were the smartest person in the room. You rely on everyone else's fear and silence to mask your own staggering incompetence." "Open it." Calvin hesitated. His arrogance was actively warring with a sudden primal dread that was rapidly draining the color from his face. His trembling hand reached out and he flipped open the heavy leather cover. 3 years ago, I began my voice ringing with absolute clinical authority. My credit monitoring service flagged a massive unauthorized inquiry. A high-interest commercial second mortgage drawn directly against the equity of this townhouse. I am a financial portfolio manager, Calvin. I manage hundreds of millions of dollars in liquid assets for private clients across the globe. Did you genuinely believe I would not notice a catastrophic six-figure lien placed on my primary residence? Calvin's eyes darted across the top document in the portfolio. It was a formal bank statement, complete with the original routing numbers and authorization signatures. His jaw went completely slack. You forged my signature on a comprehensive power of attorney. I continued, leaning in close, forcing him to look at me. You used a mobile notary who happened to be a regular at your precious country club. You funneled the cash directly into your failing commercial real estate venture to keep your creditors at bay for a few more months. You committed federal wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud, all so you could keep pretending to be a titan of industry. I had to. Calvin stammered, the booming patriarch persona completely shattering. He stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the counter to keep himself upright. The family needed the capital. The investments were just tied up. I was going to pay it back. I swear to you, Keisha, I was going to pay it back. You were never going to pay it back, I stated flatly, cutting through his pathetic lies with surgical precision. You were going to let the balloon payment hit next month, default on the loan, and let the bank throw your daughter and your autistic grandson out into the street to cover your tracks. That was your grand strategy for maintaining your image. You were perfectly willing to render us homeless to fund Traven's lifestyle. Calvin opened his mouth to argue, to deploy some familiar tactic of gaslighting or deflection, but the words died in his throat. There was nowhere left to hide. I could have called the police 3 years ago, I said, walking around the island to stand directly in front of him. I could have had you arrested while you were drinking scotch on the 18th hole. But putting you in a cell right then would have been too easy, and it would have tanked my immaculate credit score while the federal investigation dragged on for years. I could not allow your reckless stupidity to impact my financial trajectory, so I did what I do best. I handled it. I reached out and tapped the second document in the portfolio. I paid off the fraudulent second mortgage in full, exactly 36 hours after you took it out, I explained, relishing the look of absolute shock that washed over his aging face. The massive looming debt you are currently threatening me with does not exist. It has not existed for 36 months. Calvin looked like he had been physically struck by a freight train. He stared at the official zero-balance confirmation letter bearing the bank's seal. His entire blackmail scheme, the desperate play to save his son's wedding, evaporated into thin air. After I quietly paid off your felony, I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I legally transferred the deed of this townhouse into an impenetrable blind LLC. You could not liquidate this property today, even if I willingly signed your pathetic, fraudulent paperwork. You do not own it. I do not own it on paper. Magnolia Holdings owns it. You brought a forged deed to a property that is locked away in a corporate vault. Calvin was shaking uncontrollably now. The sweat that had stained his collar was now dripping down his forehead. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, as the reality of his total defeat finally penetrated his thick skull. But I did not stop there, I said, stepping even closer, backing him up against the refrigerator. I hired a private forensic handwriting expert. I had my corporate legal team compile a massive airtight dossier documenting exactly what you did, right down to the IP addresses you used to initiate the wire transfers from my equity into your failing business accounts. That dossier is sitting in a vault at my attorney's office in downtown Atlanta. Please, Calvin choked out, his eyes filling with tears of pure, unadulterated terror. He raised his shaking hands in a gesture of surrender. Keisha, please. I am your father. I made a terrible mistake. Do not do this. You are a parasite, I corrected him, feeling absolutely zero sympathy for the broken man weeping in my kitchen. You are a fraud. You came into my home on a Saturday morning to render me homeless, so you could pay for a wedding that is completely out of your financial league. You looked me in the eye and threatened to take my child away from me. You wanted to play a high-stakes game, Calvin, but you brought checkers to a chess match. I stepped back, giving him room to breathe, though the air in the room felt incredibly thin. If you ever threaten me again, I said, my voice as cold as absolute zero. If you ever attempt to leverage my life, my home, or my son, ever again, my lawyer has standing instructions to hand that entire dossier directly to the federal prosecutor. You will not just lose your country club membership. You will lose your freedom. You will spend the rest of your miserable, arrogant life in a federal penitentiary wearing a jumpsuit instead of a tuxedo. Calvin could not speak. He looked wildly around my kitchen as if searching for an escape route from the nightmare he had just walked into. He had no leverage. He had no money. And he had absolute zero power. The realization physically crushed him. His shoulders slumped and he looked smaller, weaker, and incredibly old. "Get out of my house," I commanded, pointing toward the front door. Calvin grabbed his empty manila folder. His hands were fumbling, unable to grip the paper properly. He backed away from the kitchen island, his eyes locked on mine with a mixture of profound horror and awe. He did not say another word. I had completely stripped him of his voice and his authority. He stumbled down the hallway, yanked the front door open, and practically ran out into the bright morning sunlight. I walked over to the door and watched him practically fall into the driver's seat of his leased luxury car. He peeled away from the curb, speeding down the street in a desperate, blind panic. I closed the door and slid the deadbolt firmly into place. I walked back into the kitchen and looked at the digital clock glowing on the microwave. The bright green numbers flipped with a silent, satisfying finality. 9 o'clock. The absolute deadline. Trayvon's moment of reckoning had officially arrived. He was standing inside my venue, completely out of time, completely out of money, waiting for a miraculous wire transfer from a father who had just been financially and legally castrated. I picked up my phone from the counter and dialed Tasha's private number. She answered on the first ring, the background noise of the Grand Magnolia's bustling event staff echoing loudly through the receiver. I could hear the clinking of champagne glasses being polished and the hum of florists rushing to arrange the massive floral arches. "Tell me you are ready for this," Tasha said, her voice buzzing with electric anticipation. He is pacing in the grand foyer. He keeps checking his watch and staring at the front doors. He looks like he is about to have a medical emergency. Chloe's parents just pulled up in the driveway. "Decline whatever card he tries to use," I instructed, pulling my car keys from the ceramic bowl by the door. "I am coming down." I walked up the stairs of my townhouse with a completely different kind of energy humming through my veins. The adrenaline from Calvin's pathetic attempt at blackmail had settled into something cold, hard, and intensely focused. For years, I had deliberately minimized my physical presence around my family. I had worn sensible navy slacks, muted blouses, and beige cardigans to project the exact image they expected of me. I played the role of the boring, reliable, unremarkable accountant because it kept their greedy, calculating eyes off my actual assets. But today did not call for blending in. Today called for the sartorial equivalent of a loaded weapon. I walked past my everyday clothes and reached into the garment bags at the very back of my walk-in closet. I pulled out a custom-tailored emerald green pantsuit. I had commissioned this specific suit in Milan 3 years ago to celebrate closing my first 8-figure commercial real estate acquisition. I had never worn it around my parents or Trayvon. The silk lining slipped over my skin like liquid glass. The cut was impeccable, cinching perfectly at the waist and flaring slightly at the ankles. It was a garment that demanded absolute attention and projected undeniable lethal power. I paired it with a black silk camisole and my favorite gold stiletto heels, the sharp click of the spikes against my hardwood floor sounding like a ticking clock. I moved to the vanity mirror. My hair, usually pulled back into a practical, severe bun to appease my mother's conservative sensibilities, came down. I spent 30 meticulous minutes styling it into flawless, voluminous waves that cascaded down my shoulders, framing my face with dramatic elegance. I applied a sharp, precise wing of eyeliner and a deep, rich berry lipstick. I looked in the mirror and let out a slow, steady breath. The woman staring back was not the scapegoat of the Wilson family. She was not the bitter, single mother my brother despised, or the financial pawn my father thought he could sacrifice. She was the sole proprietor of Magnolia Holdings. She was the apex predator, and it was officially feeding time. I walked down the hall to Jamal's bedroom. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the edges of his blackout curtains, casting a soft golden glow over his collection of carefully aligned model trains. I sat on the edge of his bed and gently rubbed his back, watching his chest rise and fall. He stirred, blinking up at me with those sleepy, beautiful, brilliant eyes. "Hey there, little man," I whispered, keeping my voice low and soothing so as not to jar his senses. "We are going to get up a little early today. We are going on a special field trip." Jamal sat up, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. "A field trip? Where to, Mom?" "We are going to my office," I told him, smoothing a stray curl from his forehead. "But we are not going to the home office. We are going to the big office. The really pretty one with the giant botanical gardens and the huge marble fountains you like to look at in my brochures." Jamal immediately perked up, a massive smile spreading across his face. He scrambled out of bed and headed straight for the bathroom to brush his teeth. While he got ready, I packed his sensory survival kit into a sleek black leather tote bag. I carefully placed his oversized noise-canceling headphones right at the top for easy access. I packed his favorite tablet, ensuring it was fully charged and loaded with his preferred documentaries on the solar system and deep-sea marine biology. I added 3 packs of his specific brand of organic fruit snacks and a weighted lap blanket just in case the environment became too chaotic or overwhelming. My family had called him a liability. They had deemed him socially unfit for their prestigious high society gathering. They fundamentally believed his presence, his neurodivergence, would shatter their fragile illusion of perfection in front of Chloe's affluent, judgmental parents. I zipped the tote bag closed, a fierce protective fire burning intensely in my chest. They were about to learn a very harsh lesson. My son was not a liability. He was the undisputed heir to the multi-million-dollar empire they were currently begging to enter. Jamal came back into the room fully dressed in his favorite soft cotton outfit, completely free of the restrictive, itchy formal wear Brenda had demanded he suffer through before banning him entirely. He gave me a bright, gap-toothed smile. "I am ready for the field trip, Mom." I grabbed his small hand. "Let us go claim our castle, baby." We strapped into my unassuming 5-year-old silver sedan. It was the ultimate camouflage. While Trevon leased a different European sports car every 18 months to project the illusion of limitless wealth, I drove a paid-off, reliable vehicle that rendered me completely invisible in Atlanta traffic. I backed out of my driveway and navigated toward the highway, setting a steady, unhurried pace. The drive from my modest townhouse to the sprawling, affluent northern suburbs took exactly 45 minutes. As we cruised down the interstate, my mind drifted back to the grueling, silent journey that had actually brought me to this exact moment. When my grandfather passed away, he had bypassed my parents entirely and left me a small, quiet inheritance. It was not enough to buy a private island, but it was enough seed money to start something real if managed with absolute ruthless precision. I had not bought designer bags or leased luxury vehicles to impress my peers. I had bought distressed commercial properties. I flipped them, reinvested every single cent of the capital, and eventually purchased the crown jewel of my entire portfolio. The Grand Magnolia was a historic antebellum estate that had fallen into severe disrepair after the previous owners declared bankruptcy. It had taken 2 years, millions of dollars in structural renovations, and an army of dedicated contractors to restore it to its former glory. I had overseen the installation of crystal chandeliers imported directly from France, the restoration of the hand-carved mahogany grand staircases, and the landscaping of 10 acres of pristine botanical gardens. Now it was the most exclusive, highly sought-after wedding venue in the entire Southeast. Dates were booked 3 years in advance. The minimum spend to simply walk through the front doors was staggering. My family had absolutely no idea. They thought my freelance accounting business was a desperate hustle to make ends meet. They thought my townhouse was the absolute peak of my financial capability. They spent their entire lives chasing shiny labels, leasing luxury, and bowing down to the white country club elite just to feel important. They worshipped at the altar of superficial status, totally blind to the fact that real power does not scream for attention. Real power operates in the shadows. Real power owns the land they are desperately trying to stand on. Trevin had booked my venue specifically because of its astronomical price tag, bragging to the Worthingtons about securing Atlanta's most elite location. He had been lining my pockets for 12 months without a single clue. We turned off the main highway and onto the private winding tree-lined avenue that led directly to the estate. The towering oak trees draped in thick Spanish moss formed a massive natural canopy over the road. Jamal pressed his face against the passenger window, his eyes wide with wonder. "It is like a giant forest, Mom," he whispered in awe. "It is our forest, baby," I replied, tapping my manicured fingers rhythmically against the leather steering wheel. Up ahead, the massive wrought iron gates of the Grand Magnolia came into view. The gates were standing wide open, flanked by two of my uniformed private security guards. As I drove through the entrance, I took in the sheer scale of the panic unfolding on my property. The expansive circular driveway was an absolute parking lot of jammed luxury vehicles. I spotted Trayvon's rented Maybach idling haphazardly near the massive front marble fountain. I saw Calvin's leased Mercedes parked at a crooked angle on the curb. I saw a fleet of pristine black SUVs that undoubtedly belonged to the Worthington family. The catering trucks from Tasha's company were parked off to the side, the staff standing around the loading dock in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the final word on whether this six-figure event was actually happening. The air felt thick with impending doom. I did not pull into the sprawling visitor lot. I drove straight past the panicked valet stand, ignoring the confused look of the young attendant who clearly did not recognize my modest silver sedan amidst the sea of luxury imports. I steered the car directly toward the grand front portico, pulling effortlessly into the single oversized parking space, cordoned off by a heavy crimson velvet rope. The polished brass plaque bolted securely to the brick wall read, "Owner Parking Only." I shifted the car into park and turned off the engine. I looked over at Jamal. He had already slipped his thick, noise-canceling headphones over his ears, his tablet clutched securely to his chest. He gave me a confident thumbs up, completely insulated and unbothered by the tense, erratic atmosphere surrounding us. I stepped out of the car, the crisp morning air hitting my face. I smoothed down the front of my emerald green pantsuit, feeling the silk settle perfectly into place, and walked around to the passenger side, opening the door for my son. I took his small hand in mine, feeling the solid grounding reality of his presence. We walked slowly up the wide stone steps toward the towering double mahogany front doors of the estate. Before my hand even reached the heavy brass handles, I could hear the absolute mayhem echoing from inside the grand foyer. It was a cacophony of frantic, overlapping, desperate voices. I could hear Chloe crying, a high-pitched, hysterical wail of a bride whose million-dollar fairy tale was actively burning to the ground. I could hear Arthur Worthington demanding answers in a booming, furious, deeply offended tone. And rising above it all, cutting sharply through the thick, luxurious air of my multi-million-dollar venue, was the sound of my brother Trevon. He was screaming at someone, his voice cracking and breaking with pure, unadulterated terror. He was completely trapped, financially ruined, publicly humiliated, and begging the universe for a savior. I tightened my grip on Jamal's hand, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. I reached out, grabbed the heavy brass handle, and pushed the doors wide open. The transformation began the moment I stepped into my walk-in closet. For the past 5 years, I had purposefully curated a wardrobe of invisibility when dealing with my family. I had worn sensible navy slacks, muted beige blouses, and drab gray cardigans to project the exact image they expected of me. I played the role of the boring, reliable, unremarkable accountant because it kept their greedy, calculating eyes off my actual assets. I made myself small so their fragile egos could feel large. But today did not call for blending in. Today called for the sartorial equivalent of a loaded weapon. I bypassed the rack of sensible office wear and reached into the garment bags at the very back of the closet. I pulled out a custom-tailored emerald green pantsuit. I had commissioned this specific garment in Milan 3 years ago to celebrate closing my first 8-figure commercial real estate acquisition. I had never worn it around my parents or my brother. The raw silk lining slipped over my skin like cool liquid glass. The cut was impeccable, cinching perfectly at the waist and flaring slightly at the ankles to command the space around me. It was a garment that demanded absolute attention and projected undeniable lethal power. I paired it with a black silk camisole and my favorite gold stiletto heels, the sharp spikes instantly changing my posture. I moved to the vanity mirror. My hair, usually pulled back into a severe practical bun to appease my mother's conservative sensibilities, came down. I spent 30 meticulous minutes styling it into flawless, voluminous waves that cascaded down my shoulders, framing my face with dramatic, unapologetic elegance. I applied a sharp, precise wing of black eyeliner and a deep, rich crimson lipstick. I looked in the mirror and let out a slow, steady breath. The woman staring back was not the scapegoat of the Wilson family. She was not the bitter single mother my brother despised, or the financial pawn my father thought he could sacrifice. She was the sole proprietor of Magnolia Holdings. She was the apex predator, and it was officially feeding time. I walked down the hall to Jamal's bedroom. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the edges of his blackout curtains, casting a soft golden glow over his collection of carefully aligned model trains. I sat on the edge of his bed and gently rubbed his back, watching his chest rise and fall. He stirred, blinking up at me with those sleepy, beautiful, brilliant eyes. "Hey there, little man," I whispered, keeping my voice low and soothing so as not to jar his waking senses. "We are going to get up a little early today. We are going on a special field trip." Jamal sat up, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. "A field trip where to, Mom?" "We are going to my office," I told him, smoothing a stray curl from his forehead. "But we are not going to the home office. We are going to the big office. The really pretty one with the giant botanical gardens and the huge marble fountains you like to look at in my brochures." Jamal immediately perked up, a massive smile spreading across his face. He scrambled out of bed and headed straight for the bathroom to brush his teeth. While he got ready, I packed his sensory survival kit into a sleek black leather tote bag. I carefully placed his oversized noise-canceling headphones right at the top for easy access. I packed his favorite tablet, ensuring it was fully charged and loaded with his preferred documentaries on the solar system and deep-sea marine biology. I added 3 packs of his specific brand of organic fruit snacks and a weighted lap blanket just in case the environment became too chaotic or overwhelming. My family had called him a liability. They had deemed him socially unfit for their prestigious high society gathering. They fundamentally believed his presence, his neurodivergence, would shatter their fragile illusion of perfection in front of Chloe's affluent, judgmental parents. I zipped the tote bag closed, a fierce, protective fire burning intensely in my chest. They were about to learn a very harsh lesson. My son was not a liability. He was the undisputed heir to the multi-million-dollar empire they were currently begging to enter. Jamal came back into the room fully dressed in his favorite soft cotton outfit, completely free of the restrictive, itchy formal wear Brenda had demanded he suffer through before banning him entirely. He gave me a bright, gap-toothed smile. "I am ready for the field trip, Mom." I grabbed his small hand. "Let us go claim our castle baby." We strapped into my unassuming 5-year-old silver sedan. It was the ultimate camouflage. While Trevon leased a different European sports car every 18 months to project the illusion of limitless wealth, I drove a paid-off, reliable vehicle that rendered me completely invisible in Atlanta traffic. I backed out of my driveway and navigated toward the highway, setting a steady, unhurried pace. The drive from my modest townhouse to the sprawling, affluent northern suburbs took exactly 45 minutes. As we cruised down the interstate, my mind drifted back to the grueling, silent journey that had actually brought me to this exact moment. When my grandfather passed away, he had bypassed my parents entirely and left me a small, quiet inheritance. It was not enough to buy a private island, but it was enough seed money to start something real if managed with absolute ruthless precision. I had not bought designer bags or leased luxury vehicles to impress my peers. I had bought distressed commercial properties. I flipped them, reinvested every single cent of the capital, and eventually purchased the crown jewel of my entire portfolio. The Grand Magnolia was a historic estate that had fallen into severe disrepair after the previous owners declared bankruptcy. It had taken 2 years, millions of dollars in structural renovations, and an army of dedicated contractors to restore it to its former glory. I had overseen the installation of crystal chandeliers imported directly from France, the restoration of the hand-carved mahogany grand staircases, and the landscaping of 10 acres of pristine botanical gardens. Now, it was the most exclusive, highly sought-after wedding venue in the entire Southeast. Dates were booked 3 years in advance. The minimum spend to simply walk through the front doors was staggering. My family had absolutely no idea. They thought my freelance accounting business was a desperate hustle to make ends meet. They thought my townhouse was the absolute peak of my financial capability. They spent their entire lives chasing shiny labels, leasing luxury, and bowing down to the country club elite just to feel important. They worshipped at the altar of superficial status, totally blind to the fact that real power does not scream for attention. Real power operates in the shadows. Real power owns the land they are desperately trying to stand on. Trayvon had booked my venue specifically because of its astronomical price tag, bragging to the Worthingtons about securing Atlanta's most elite location. He had been lining my pockets for 12 months without a single clue. We turned off the main highway and onto the private, winding, tree-lined avenue that led directly to the estate. The towering oak trees draped in thick Spanish moss formed a massive natural canopy over the road. Jamal pressed his face against the passenger window, his eyes wide with wonder. "It is like a giant forest, Mom," he whispered in awe. "It is our forest, baby," I replied, tapping my manicured fingers rhythmically against the leather steering wheel. Up ahead, the massive wrought iron gates of the Grand Magnolia came into view. The gates were standing wide open, flanked by 2 of my uniformed private security guards. As I drove through the entrance, I took in the sheer scale of the panic unfolding on my property. The expansive circular driveway was an absolute parking lot of jammed luxury vehicles. I spotted Trayvon's rented Maybach idling haphazardly near the massive front marble fountain. I saw Calvin's leased Mercedes parked at a crooked angle on the curb. I saw a fleet of pristine black SUVs that undoubtedly belonged to the Worthington family. The catering trucks from Tasha's company were parked off to the side, the staff standing around the loading dock, in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the final word on whether this 6-figure event was actually happening. The air felt thick with impending doom. I did not pull into the sprawling visitor lot. I drove straight past the panicked valet stand, ignoring the confused look of the young attendant, who clearly did not recognize my modest silver sedan amidst the sea of luxury imports. I steered the car directly toward the grand front portico, pulling effortlessly into the single oversized parking space cordoned off by a heavy crimson velvet rope. The polished brass plaque bolted securely to the brick wall read, "Owner Parking Only." I shifted the car into park and turned off the engine. I looked over at Jamal. He had already slipped his thick, noise-canceling headphones over his ears, his tablet clutched securely to his chest. He gave me a confident thumbs up, completely insulated and unbothered by the tense, erratic atmosphere surrounding us. I stepped out of the car, the crisp morning air hitting my face. I smoothed down the front of my emerald green pantsuit, feeling the silk settle perfectly into place, and walked around to the passenger side, opening the door for my son. I took his small hand in mine, feeling the solid grounding reality of his presence. We walked slowly up the wide stone steps toward the towering double mahogany front doors of the estate. Before my hand even reached the heavy brass handles, I could hear the absolute mayhem echoing from inside the grand foyer. I pushed the doors open, the sheer weight of them a testament to the uncompromising quality of my building. The immediate blast of perfectly chilled lavender-scented air conditioning washed over us. The foyer of the Grand Magnolia was designed to take your breath away. 30-foot ceilings imported Italian marble floors that gleamed like glass and dual sweeping staircases that framed a massive cascading waterfall wall. Sunlight poured through the custom stained glass skylight, casting fractured rainbows across the pristine white walls. It was currently being used as a staging ground for a complete psychological meltdown. Trayvon stood at the center of the vast room, looking like a man who had just been electrocuted. His custom-tailored ivory tuxedo jacket was entirely unbuttoned. He was sweating profusely, the dark patches bleeding through the fine fabric of his shirt. He was pacing furiously in front of the antique concierge desk, screaming at Tasha, who stood behind the polished mahogany counter looking completely unbothered. To Trevon's left, the Worthington family had formed a tight, horrified circle of affluent despair. Chloe was a chaotic explosion of hand-beaded lace silk tulle and Swarovski crystals. She was hyperventilating, her perfectly contoured makeup running down her face in dark, muddy streaks as she sobbed into her hands. Her affluent, judgmental parents were hovering over her, their faces pinched in absolute disgust, staring at Trayvon like he was a stray dog that had wandered into their pristine lives. And then there was Brenda. My mother was slumped in a tufted velvet armchair near the grand staircase, fanning herself aggressively with a glossy wedding program. She looked pale, clammy, and utterly defeated, looking like she might faint at any given second. The flawless matriarch was actively crumbling under the weight of severe public humiliation. I took a step forward. The sharp, resonant click of my gold stiletto against the Italian marble echoed through the cavernous foyer like a gunshot. I stopped dead in the center of the room, holding Jamal's hand. I smoothed the lapel of my custom emerald pantsuit and cleared my throat. The sound was quiet, but it cut through the screaming like a knife. Every single head snapped in my direction. The crying stopped. The furious whispering ceased. The room descended into a sudden, suffocating silence. Trevon's bloodshot eyes locked onto me. For a split second, he looked completely confused. The visual disconnect of seeing his boring, unremarkable sister standing in his multi-million-dollar dream venue, draped in custom-tailored Italian silk and projecting absolute confidence, broke his brain. Then the confusion instantly morphed into vicious, cornered animal rage. "What the hell are you doing here?" Trevon roared, the veins in his neck bulging against his sweat-soaked collar. He stomped toward me, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "I told you you're banned." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, radiating absolute power. "You showed up here to ruin my wedding day," Trayvon spat, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "And you brought that defect with you." He glared down at Jamal. "Security, get this bitter bitch and her weird kid out of here." The tension in the room shattered. Chloe's mother, sensing an opportunity to purge the room of the supposed riffraff, immediately jumped in. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her voice shrill and dripping with country club entitlement. "Yes, absolutely remove her." The two massive private security guards standing near the entrance stepped forward, but they did not reach for me. They did not even look at me. They stopped 3 feet away, turned their heads, and looked directly past Trayvon, waiting for a command. Tasha slowly stepped out from behind the mahogany concierge desk. She did not rush. She moved with the calm, measured authority of a woman who was thoroughly enjoying the execution. She walked over and stood right next to me. She crossed her arms over her chest, looked at Trayvon and smiled. The silence in the foyer was absolute. Trayvon was panting, his chest heaving, waiting for the guards to drag me away. Tasha's voice rang clearly through the massive sunlit lobby, echoing off the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. "Security won't be removing anyone, Trayvon. She owns the building." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that follows a car crash, where all the oxygen is suddenly sucked out of the room. Tasha's words hung in the chilled, lavender-scented air, bouncing off the imported Italian marble and the 30-foot ceilings. "Security won't be removing anyone, Trayvon. She owns the building." Trayvon's mouth hung open. His jaw actually went slack. He looked from Tasha to me, then back to Tasha, his bloodshot eyes darting frantically as his brain completely failed to process the information. He let out a harsh, breathless sound that was half scoff, half choke. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice stripped of all its usual booming executive authority. "That is impossible." Keisha is an accountant. She lives in a tiny townhouse. She crunches numbers for small businesses. Chloe's parents exchanged a look of total bewilderment. Arthur Worthington, a man used to being the most powerful person in any room, narrowed his eyes at the scene unfolding before him. He tightened his grip on his sobbing daughter's arm. "What on earth is going on here?" Arthur demanded, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Trayvon, who is this woman? And why is the venue manager saying she owns the property?" Before Trayvon could scramble for a lie, Brenda sprang into action. The shock had temporarily paralyzed her, but Arthur Worthington's authoritative tone snapped her back to her desperate need to control the narrative. She pushed herself up from the tufted velvet armchair, her face flushed with a mixture of panic and fury. "Tasha, stop this ridiculous nonsense right now," Brenda ordered, marching across the foyer with her designer handbag clutched to her chest like a shield. "How much did she pay you to say that? Did Keisha put you up to this? This is extortion. I will have your catering license revoked. I will make sure you never work in Atlanta again. You are looking at the family who is paying your salary tonight. You will show us the respect we deserve, and you will have this bitter, jealous girl thrown off the premises." Tasha did not flinch. She simply smiled, a cool, professional smile that conveyed absolute pity. "I am afraid you are mistaken, Mrs. Wilson. You are not paying my salary. Keisha pays my salary. Magnolia Holdings is the parent company of this estate and my catering firm. Keisha is the sole proprietor of Magnolia Holdings." Brenda stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes snapped to me, searching my face for any sign of a bluff, any hint of the submissive, easily intimidated daughter she had spent decades terrorizing. She found nothing but a fortress of emerald green silk and cold, calculated amusement. "She isn't lying, Mother," I said, my voice ringing out with a calm, undeniable authority that anchored the entire room. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, the gold spike of my heel clicking sharply against the marble. I kept a firm, gentle hold on Jamal's hand. He was happily tracing the edge of his tablet, completely insulated by his noise-canceling headphones, a picture of perfect peace amidst their absolute ruin. "I bought this estate 3 years ago out of a commercial bankruptcy auction," I explained, keeping my gaze locked on Brenda's horrified face. "I funded the multi-million-dollar restorations. I oversaw the installation of those French crystal chandeliers you have been bragging about to your country club friends all morning. I own the catering company that cooked the $15,000 rehearsal dinner you forced Arthur to pay for last night. I own the marble you are standing on. I own the botanical gardens outside. I am the landlord of the very ground you are desperately trying to claim as your own kingdom." The color completely drained from Brenda's face. She looked as if the floor had suddenly opened up and swallowed her whole. The illusion of her superiority, the absolute certainty that I was a failure and Trayvon was a success, shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her eyes. She swayed slightly, reaching out to grip the edge of the mahogany concierge desk for physical support. Trayvon was hyperventilating. The sweat was now rolling down his temples in thick drops. He yanked at the collar of his ruined tuxedo shirt, gasping for air, as the reality of the situation finally penetrated his thick skull. The massive, insurmountable $80,000 debt he had been desperately trying to secure all morning was owed to me. The anonymous corporate entity he had been begging for a deadline extension was his own sister. The sister he had banned from the premises for not fitting his aesthetic. But Trayvon was a creature of pure, unadulterated entitlement. His panic lasted exactly 1 minute before his survival instincts kicked in. His brain, hardwired to exploit my labor for his own benefit, found what he believed was a massive loophole. The terror in his eyes was suddenly replaced by a sickening, familiar gleam of arrogant opportunism. "Wait," Trayvon said, holding his hands up, a frantic, breathless laugh escaping his throat. "Wait a minute. You own this. You actually own the Grand Magnolia?" He turned around to face the Worthingtons, throwing his arms open wide in a gesture of triumphant victory. The sheer audacity of his pivot was breathtaking. "Arthur, look at this," Trayvon announced, his voice regaining a fraction of its former booming confidence. "I told you my family had generational wealth. I told you we were major players in commercial real estate. My sister owns the venue. This is a family business. We own the estate. Arthur Worthington looked entirely unconvinced, his eyes narrowing in deep suspicion as he assessed my tailored suit and Trevon's frantic, sweat-soaked appearance. Chloe stopped crying for a brief second, peeking out from behind her hands, a spark of desperate hope lighting up her tear-streaked face. Trevon spun back to me, closing the distance between us. He lowered his voice, adopting the patronizing, commanding tone he used whenever he needed me to fix his messes. "Keisha, this is actually perfect," he whispered intensely, completely ignoring the fact that he had just ordered security to throw me out 2 minutes prior. "You own the building. That means the debt does not matter. The 80 grand is just a paper transfer. Tell Tasha to comp the wedding, waive the venue fee. You are the owner, you can override the accounting department right now. Just hit clear on the balance and let us get the vendors setting up." I stared at him, letting his words hang in the air. He was completely serious. After decades of emotional abuse, after calling my son a defect, after allowing our mother to banish me to the shadows so he could shine, he genuinely believed I was going to hand him an $80,000 free pass just because we shared the same last name. I laughed. It started deep in my chest, a rich, dark sound that vibrated with absolute power. It echoed through the grand foyer, completely shattering Trevon's desperate attempt at a victory lap. "Comp the wedding," I repeated, shaking my head in pure disbelief. "You want me to comp the wedding that I am explicitly banned from attending? You want me to waive an $80,000 commercial invoice for an event where my neurodivergent son was deemed too much of a social liability to even exist in the background?" Trevon's face hardened. He took another step toward me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, a tactic that might have worked when we were teenagers, but was entirely useless against the woman standing in front of him today. "Do not do this right now," Keisha, Trevon warned through gritted teeth. "Do not play these petty games in front of my future in-laws. I am not playing around. This is my wedding day. You are my sister, and you owe me this. You are not banned. Mom just meant you should not sit in the front row where the photographers are focusing. We will put a table in the back for you and the kid. Just clear the balance in the system so I can marry Chloe." He was offering me a seat in the shadows of my own multi-million-dollar estate. He was offering me the privilege of hiding in the back corner while he stood on the altar I bought and paid for. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I spoke with a quiet, lethal clarity that carried to every single corner of the sunlit room. "I do not owe you a single breath of air in this building, Trevon. The $80,000 balance is due immediately in certified funds, or Tasha will lock the gates and send your vendors home. I do not do family discounts for people who view my child as a disease to be hidden away." Brenda finally found her voice. She pushed away from the mahogany desk, her eyes blazing with a desperate, toxic rage. "Keisha, you listen to me right now. You will authorize this wedding. Your father will not stand for this. He is the head of the family trust, and he will cut you off completely. He will seize your assets and ruin your little accounting business. We fund your entire life through the trust." I turned my gaze to Brenda. It was time to pull the final curtain down on the illusion that had kept them all running on a treadmill of arrogance. I unzipped the sleek black leather tote bag resting on my shoulder. I bypassed Jamal's extra fruit snacks and his weighted lap blanket. I reached deep into the bottom of the bag and pulled out a thick black leather ledger. It was the master accounting log for the Phantom Empire they all worshipped. I held the heavy black book up in the air. The gold-embossed letters on the cover caught the sunlight streaming through the stained glass ceiling. "Let us talk about the family trust, Trevon," I said, my voice completely devoid of any remaining warmth. I slapped the heavy ledger down onto the polished surface of the concierge desk. The sharp thud made Brenda physically jump. "Let us talk about the generational wealth you have been bragging about to Arthur Worthington all morning. Let us talk about who actually pays the mortgage on that massive colonial house Mom is currently living in. Let us talk about the leasing company that holds the title to the Maybach you parked illegally out front. Let us talk about who really paid for that diamond Rolex currently sitting on your sweating wrist." I locked eyes with my brother, watching the last remaining shred of his fabricated reality turn to dust. "Open the book, Trevon. Open it and see exactly who you have been stealing from your entire life." Trayvon stared at the black leather ledger as if it were a live grenade. He did not move a single muscle. His breathing was shallow, his eyes wide with a horrific realization that his carefully constructed house of cards was currently imploding. "Go ahead, Trayvon," I instructed, my voice echoing off the marble. "Show Mr. Worthington the legendary Wilson family portfolio. Show him the generational wealth you have been leveraging to secure his daughter's hand in marriage." When Trayvon remained frozen, I reached out and flipped the heavy cover open myself. I bypassed the first few pages and flattened the book out in the dead center of the mahogany desk. "Since my brother has suddenly lost his booming executive voice," I said, turning my attention directly to Arthur Worthington, "allow me to translate the accounting. There is no family trust, Mr. Worthington. There has never been a family trust. My father, Calvin Wilson, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy exactly 5 years ago. He liquidated his failing commercial real estate venture to avoid federal indictment for gross mismanagement of investor funds." Arthur Worthington's jaw tightened. The aristocratic patriarch of Chloe's family stepped forward, his sharp eyes darting from my face to Trayvon's sweating forehead. "That is an absolute lie!" Brenda shrieked. She pushed herself off the velvet chair, stumbling slightly in her designer heels as she rushed toward the desk. "Arthur, do not listen to a word she says. She is a jealous, bitter girl who has always tried to destroy her brother's happiness. Calvin is a titan in this city." "Calvin is a grifter, Mother," I corrected smoothly, not even turning to look at her. I kept my gaze locked on Arthur. "Every single dime this family has spent for the last half-decade has come directly from me, Magnolia Holdings. They funnel my money through a shell LLC to make it look like a trust disbursement." I flipped a page in the ledger. "Let us examine the groom's assets." I continued, my voice taking on a clinical surgical precision. I turned my head to look directly at Chloe. She was trembling, clutching the skirts of her massive lace gown, her eyes darting frantically between me and her silent, sweating fiancé. "Chloe," I said softly, but with enough edge to command her absolute attention. "Trayvon does not own the luxury condo you two currently live in. Magnolia Holdings owns it. He is a tenant, and I am his landlord. The Maybach parked out front leased under my corporate account. His bespoke wardrobe, his country club dues, the extravagant vacations you two took to St. Bart's last summer to maintain his pristine social media presence. All of it was financed through a high-yield corporate credit line that I personally guarantee." Chloe gasped, a sharp, ragged sound of pure horror. She looked at Trayvon, her tear-streaked face begging him to deny it. Trayvon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just stood there, completely emasculated, shrinking under the harsh fluorescent lights of reality. "And the ring," I said, leaning forward slightly, tapping a specific line item highlighted in bright yellow ink on the ledger. "A flawless 4-carat radiant cut diamond from Tiffany & Company. $85,000 paid in full via wire transfer. A wire transfer initiated by Magnolia Holdings." Chloe looked down at her left hand as if the massive diamond had suddenly caught fire. "I funded his entire illusion, Chloe," I explained, dropping the temperature in the room to absolute zero. "I paid for the privilege of being ignored. I subsidized my own exclusion because it kept them out of my face while I built an actual empire. I was perfectly willing to let him keep playing pretend. But then Thursday happened." I stepped away from the desk, moving closer to Trayvon, forcing him to look at me. "You called my son a defective weirdo?" I said, the venom finally bleeding into my voice. "You looked at a brilliant, beautiful child and decided he was a social liability. You banned us from this venue because you thought we would embarrass you in front of these people." I gestured to the Worthingtons. "So I froze the accounts." I stated the finality of the words hanging in the air. "I canceled the credit cards. I stopped the auto drafts. The $80,000 final venue payment that was supposed to hit Tasha's system yesterday morning. It bounced because I revoked his access to my capital. He is completely broke, Chloe. He is out of time, he is out of money, and he is out of lies." "Stop it!" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. She lunged for the ledger, her hands clawing desperately at the pages. "You are ruining everything. You are destroying your family." Before Brenda could grab the book, the heavy brass handles of the front doors clanged loudly. The heavy wood groaned as the doors were pushed open. Calvin stumbled into the foyer. He looked like a ghost. His perfectly groomed country club exterior was completely gone. His tie was missing. His shirt was untucked and stained with sweat. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wild and unfocused, still reeling from the total financial and legal castration I had delivered to him in my kitchen barely an hour ago. He stopped in the entryway, taking in the scene. He saw Trayvon sweating in his tuxedo. He saw the Worthingtons glaring at him. He saw Brenda reaching frantically for the ledger. And then he saw me standing tall in emerald green holding his grandson's hand. "Calvin!" Brenda shrieked, practically running toward him. "Calvin, do something. Keisha is telling them lies about the trust. She is trying to cancel the wedding. Tell Arthur the truth. Tell him who we are." Calvin did not speak. He could not speak. He looked at me, and the absolute terror in his eyes confirmed everything I had just said to the entire room. "Go ahead, Dad." I challenged him, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity. "Tell Mr. Worthington exactly who you are. Tell him about the morning you just had. Tell him how you showed up at my house with a fraudulent quitclaim deed to try and steal the equity out of my primary residence." The collective gasp from the Worthington family was audible. Arthur Worthington took a sharp step backward, shielding his wife as if Calvin were carrying a contagious disease. "Tell them about the felony wire fraud, Dad," I pressed, stepping toward him. "Tell them how you forged my signature on a power of attorney to secretly take out a massive commercial loan against my property because your own credit is so completely ruined you cannot even qualify for a Target store card." "Keisha, please." Calvin choked out his voice, a pathetic, broken wheeze. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, exactly as he had done in my kitchen. "Do not do this here." "I am not doing anything," I replied smoothly, a cold smile touching my lips. "I am simply providing the receipts. You demanded a high society wedding. I am just ensuring the bride's family has full financial transparency." Brenda spun around, her face twisted in a mask of absolute hatred. She pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You vindictive, ungrateful wretch!" Brenda screamed, completely abandoning her polished matriarch persona. She stepped toward me, her hands balled into fists. "After everything we have done for you, you are deliberately destroying your brother's life because you are a miserable, lonely woman who cannot keep a man. I order you to stop talking right now." "Let her speak." The voice boomed through the foyer with the force of a thunderclap. It was not Trayvon. It was not Calvin. It was Arthur Worthington. The patriarch of the Worthington family stepped out from the circle of his horrified relatives. He was a tall, imposing man, and right now his face was a mask of cold, aristocratic fury. He looked at Brenda with an expression of such profound disgust that my mother physically recoiled, stepping back, as if she had been slapped. "Do not interrupt her again, Brenda." Arthur commanded, his voice lethal. He turned his piercing gaze from my crumbling parents to my sweating brother, taking in the full pathetic scope of their deception. He then looked directly at me. The condescension he usually reserved for the working class was gone, replaced by the grim respect one businessman gives to another when a massive fraud has just been uncovered. "Ms. Wilson," Arthur said, his tone deadly calm. "You mentioned wire fraud. You mentioned a forged power of attorney. I am demanding to hear the rest of it, every single detail, because if what you are saying is true, my daughter is currently standing at the altar with a penniless grifter." "Arthur, no, it is a misunderstanding," Trayvon cried out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. He stepped toward his future father-in-law, his hands pleading. "The business just has cash flow issues. It is tied up in liquid assets. Keisha is just trying to embarrass me." "Shut your mouth, Trayvon!" Arthur roared, the sheer volume silencing the entire room instantly. He did not look at Trayvon again. He kept his eyes locked on me. "Ms. Wilson, the floor is yours. Finish the autopsy." I smiled. It was the smile of an executioner. I reached back into my black leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila folder, the identical twin to the one Calvin had dropped on my kitchen counter. I walked over and handed it directly to Arthur Worthington. Page 4 contains the IP addresses used to initiate the fraudulent transfers. I stated clinically, watching Arthur's eyes scan the documents. Page 7 is the forensic handwriting analysis confirming my father forged my signature. And page 12 is the zero balance confirmation showing that Magnolia Holdings paid off the massive debt they secretly incurred to fund this entire charade. Arthur flipped through the pages. The silence in the foyer was so absolute you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning vents. With every page Arthur turned, Trevon seemed to physically shrink his broad shoulders, collapsing inward, as his entire fabricated existence was systematically dismantled by undeniable paper trails. Chloe stood frozen in her extravagant custom-beaded wedding gown. The heavy silk and lace now looked less like a bridal dress and more like a costume she had been tricked into wearing. Her mascara was completely ruined, leaving dark, tragic smudges beneath her eyes. She looked at her father, reading the grim, disgusted confirmation on his face. She turned her gaze slowly back to Trevon. He could not look at her. He stared at the Italian marble floor, broken, exposed, and utterly ruined. A ragged, humiliating sob tore from Chloe's throat. She raised her left hand, her eyes locking onto the massive, flawless 4-carat diamond glinting under the crystal chandeliers. The ring she had flaunted to her friends. The ring that represented a billionaire lifestyle that did not actually exist. The ring that belonged to the woman she had happily agreed to ban from the wedding. Slowly, her right hand reached over her fingers, gripping the cold metal band. Chloe's fingers clamped down on the cold platinum band of her engagement ring. The massive 4-carat diamond that she had spent the last 8 months flashing at country club luncheons and bridal boutique fittings suddenly looked like a shackle. She stared at it, her breathing shallow and ragged, as the complete devastation of her reality settled in. The man she was supposed to walk down the aisle with in less than an hour was not a wealthy real estate mogul. He was a tenant. He was a fraud. He was a man who relied on his sister to fund his entire existence, and he had just publicly alienated the only source of capital he had left. Treven saw the shift in her eyes. Panic absolute and unadulterated washed over his sweating face. He took a desperate, clumsy step toward her, holding his hands out in a pleading gesture. "Chloe, baby, please." Trevon begged, his voice cracking. "Do not listen to her. We can fix this. I can explain everything. It is just a temporary cash flow problem. The business is going to bounce back. We are still going to have our perfect life." "Do not touch me," Chloe shrieked, recoiling from him as if he were covered in venom. She yanked the ring off her finger. The platinum scraped harshly against her knuckle, leaving a bright red mark. She did not hand it back to him gently. She threw it. She threw it with every ounce of fury and humiliation burning inside her chest. The heavy diamond struck Trevon squarely in the center of his chest, bouncing off his sweat-soaked tuxedo shirt and clattering onto the pristine Italian marble floor. The sharp metallic ping echoed loudly in the silent foyer, rolling away and coming to a rest near the toe of my gold stiletto. Chloe did not even watch it fall. She turned her back on him, completely looking up at her father. Her face was a mask of ruined makeup and total despair. "Get me out of this scam!" Chloe sobbed, gripping her father's arm. "Get me out of here right now!" Arthur Worthington did not hesitate. He wrapped a thick, protective arm around his daughter's trembling shoulders, pulling her close. He cast one final sweeping look of pure, concentrated disgust over my parents and my brother. It was the look of a man who had just narrowly avoided stepping into an open sewer. "You will be hearing from my attorneys by the end of the business day." Arthur stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that promised absolute destruction. "You will reimburse every single cent my family spent on this fraudulent spectacle, Trevon. If you attempt to contact my daughter again, I will personally ensure you never find employment in this state." Arthur turned on his heel. He guided his weeping daughter toward the heavy mahogany front doors, his wife following closely behind them, casting a final glare of sheer revulsion at Brenda. The heavy doors swung open, letting in a blast of warm Georgia air, and then slammed shut behind them with a definitive booming thud. The Worthington family was gone. The wedding was officially dead. Trayvon let out a sound that I had never heard a grown man make. It was a hollow, agonizing wail. His knees simply gave out. He collapsed onto the marble floor, his tailored tuxedo pants bunching up around his legs. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, frantically searching the smooth stone until his fingers brushed against the discarded engagement ring. He scooped it up, clutching the diamond to his chest, and began to cry like a lost child. He wept for the loss of his status, the loss of his wealthy bride, and the complete, irreversible loss of his fake empire. The foyer was a graveyard of the Wilson family ego. Calvin was still standing near the entrance, frozen in a state of catatonic shock. Trayvon was sobbing on the floor, and then there was Brenda. My mother had watched the entire scene unfold with wide, horrified eyes. She had watched the wealthy, prestigious family she had desperately courted walk out the door in total disgust. She had watched the social event of the decade dissolve into a criminal fraud exposure. Her brain, unable to process the sheer magnitude of her defeat, violently rejected reality. She snapped. She pivoted entirely, completely abandoning the vicious, hateful tone she had used against me just minutes prior. Brenda rushed across the foyer, her high heels clicking frantically against the marble. She stopped right in front of me, her hands trembling as she reached out. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Keisha, Brenda cried, her voice high and desperate, dripping with a sudden, sickening sweetness. Keisha, my beautiful, successful girl, you have to fix this. You have to make this right. I stared at her, my expression completely blank. I did not move an inch. You have all this money, Brenda pleaded, the tears flowing faster now. You own this entire estate. You have to go after Arthur. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him you will cover the damages. You have to save the family reputation, Keisha. Think about the church. Think about what the congregation will say when they find out the wedding was canceled. You cannot let them ruin us. You are a Wilson. You have to protect your brother. She reached out and placed her trembling hand on the sleeve of my emerald green suit jacket. It was a gesture of maternal desperation, a plea for salvation from the very daughter she had spent 30 years trying to destroy. She genuinely believed that because I had money, I was obligated to use it to shield her from the consequences of her own horrific behavior. She believed the title of family was a magic word that would instantly erase a lifetime of abuse. I looked down at her hand resting on my silk sleeve. I looked at the woman who had demanded I hide my neurodivergent son so he would not ruin her aesthetic. I looked at the woman who had called my beautiful, brilliant child a defect. I looked at the woman who had happily allowed my father to try and steal my home just to fund her son's delusions of grandeur. I reached up with my free hand. I did not slap her away. I did not yell. I moved with agonizing, deliberate slowness. I pinched the fabric of her sleeve between my thumb and forefinger and gently, firmly lifted her hand off my jacket. I let her arm drop back down to her side. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a weight that made her physically recoil. "You do not have a daughter, Brenda. You made that abundantly clear when you banned me from this building, and I certainly do not have a family to protect." Brenda gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, a fresh wave of tears spilling over her cheeks as the absolute finality of my words struck her. I stepped back, creating a definitive physical boundary between myself and the wreckage of the Wilson family. I squared my shoulders, feeling the immense heavy power of total ownership settling into my bones. "You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your things and vacate my property," I announced, my voice terrifyingly calm, slicing through Trayvon's continued sobbing. "If any of you are still standing in this foyer when that clock runs out, I will have you all arrested and charged with criminal trespassing." Calvin flinched. The word criminal was the final nail in his coffin. He knew better than anyone in the room that I had the documentation to put him in a federal penitentiary. He did not say a word. He simply turned around, his shoulders completely slumped, and began walking slowly toward the heavy mahogany doors, looking like a man marching to the gallows. Brenda let out a sharp, devastated wail. She looked from me to Trayvon, then back to me, searching for any shred of mercy. She found none. She grabbed her glossy wedding program, clutched her designer bag, and hurried after my father, her head bowed in absolute disgrace. Trayvon remained on the floor, clutching the ring, unwilling or unable to move. I looked over at Tasha. She had been watching the entire exchange with a look of profound satisfaction. I gave her a single sharp nod. Tasha raised her hand and snapped her fingers. The two massive private security guards standing near the entrance immediately stepped forward. Two more guards emerged silently from the hallway leading to the grand ballroom. They formed a tight, imposing perimeter around my brother. "Time to go," Trayvon, one of the guards, said, his voice deep and completely devoid of sympathy. Trayvon looked up at the circle of security. The reality of his complete powerlessness finally broke him. He slowly pushed himself up off the marble floor. His ivory tuxedo was wrinkled and stained. His face was puffy and red. He did not look at me. He could not make eye contact with the woman who had just dismantled his entire life in under 20 minutes. He shoved the engagement ring into his pocket, grabbed his discarded suit jacket from a nearby chair, and began the long, agonizing walk of shame toward the exit. I stood in the center of the sunlit foyer holding Jamal's hand and watched them walk out of my building. I watched them walk out of my life. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind them, sealing the estate. The silence that settled over the Grand Magnolia was not suffocating. It was light. It was clean. It was the sound of absolute peace. 1 month later, the fallout was complete and total. The story of the canceled Worthington Wilson wedding had not just spread. It had detonated. It ripped through the affluent Atlanta social circles, the Buckhead elite country clubs, and the sprawling HBCU alumni networks like wildfire. You cannot keep a secret when 300 of the city's most influential residents are sent home from a reception that never happened. The Worthingtons, humiliated by their near association with a fraud, made absolutely sure that everyone in their tax bracket knew exactly why the wedding was canceled. The social ruin for my parents was absolute. Brenda, who had spent a decade fighting her way to the top of the social hierarchy at her megachurch, was forced to step down from her position as the head of the hospitality committee. The whispers and the pointed stares from the congregation became too much for her fragile ego to bear. She stopped attending Sunday services, entirely hiding in her heavily mortgaged colonial home, terrified to show her face at the grocery store. Calvin was in a fight for his freedom. True to my word, I had not handed the blackmail dossier to the federal prosecutor, but I did not need to. The sudden violent withdrawal of my financial support caused Calvin's remaining shell companies to collapse. The State Banking Commission opened a quiet, rigorous investigation into his past real estate dealings. He spent his days sitting in cheap lawyers' offices, desperately trying to leverage assets he no longer owned to keep himself out of a jumpsuit. But Trayvon's downfall was a masterpiece of karmic justice. Without my corporate credit lines acting as a dam, the floodwaters of reality completely consumed him. The leasing company repossessed his Maybach directly from the parking lot of his luxury high-rise. 3 days later, my property management team served him with a formal 30-day eviction notice. He was forced to pack his bespoke suits into garbage bags and move into a tiny, run-down one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The final blow came exactly 2 weeks after the canceled wedding. Arthur Worthington was not a man who forgave public embarrassment. He made exactly 3 phone calls to the executive board of the commercial brokerage firm where Trayvon worked. Trayvon was quietly and permanently let go, his reputation in the Atlanta commercial sector completely decimated. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of success, and now he had absolutely nothing. 6 months later, the bitter cold of that Atlanta morning felt like a lifetime away. I sat back against a plush white linen lounge chair, the warm, golden Mediterranean sun beating down on my skin. The air smelled of salt and wild thyme. Before me stretched the impossible, vibrant, endless expanse of the Aegean Sea, the water a brilliant crystalline turquoise that seemed to glow from within. We were on a private, secluded beach on the southern coast of Santorini, Greece. The whitewashed cliffs rose majestically behind us, framing a perfect slice of paradise. I took a slow sip of my iced pomegranate mocktail, feeling a profound, deeply rooted sense of tranquility that I had never known in my entire life. A few yards away, right at the edge of the gentle lapping waves, Jamal was humming happily to himself. He was wearing bright yellow swim trunks, his noise-canceling headphones resting securely around his neck. He was completely focused, using a set of brightly colored plastic buckets to construct a massive, highly detailed, architecturally complex sandcastle. He was not hiding. He was not being hushed. He was not being forced into restrictive clothing to appease people who hated him. He was safe. He was brilliant. He was entirely unconditionally accepted. I watched him pack wet sand into a turret, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. I had fought a war to give him this peace, and I had won. I reached over to the small wooden table next to my lounge chair and picked up my phone. I opened my secure banking application and checked the quarterly portfolio update for Magnolia Holdings. The numbers on the screen were staggering. Without the massive continuous financial drain of supporting Trayvon's fake lifestyle and Calvin's failing schemes, my profit margins had skyrocketed. The capital I had stopped bleeding out to my toxic family had been aggressively reinvested. I had acquired 2 new commercial properties in downtown Savannah and secured a highly lucrative municipal contract for my accounting firm. My empire was expanding at a pace that even I had not fully anticipated. I smiled, tapping out of the financial dashboard. As the screen refreshed, a small red notification icon popped up on my home screen. It was a blocked voicemail. My security software automatically filtered calls from known restricted numbers, depositing them into a hidden folder. I tapped the icon. The caller ID simply read, Trayvon Wilson. I stared at the name. A year ago, seeing that name would have caused a spike of anxiety, a conditioned response to decades of demands and emotional manipulation. Now it provoked absolutely nothing. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I felt only the vast, quiet distance between my reality and his. I knew exactly what the voicemail would be. It would be a desperate, rambling plea for cash. It would be a frantic promise to pay me back, a manipulative attempt to invoke family loyalty, a pathetic demand for a bailout from a tiny, rundown apartment in Atlanta. I did not press play. I did not need to hear the ghost of a life I had already buried. I swiped left on the notification. The screen flashed a red prompt, delete permanently. I tapped confirm. The voicemail vanished into the digital void, erased completely from existence. I pulled down the control center menu on my phone and tapped the airplane icon. The cellular signal immediately disconnected, cutting off all ties to the outside world, severing any remaining invisible strings that tried to pull me back to the past. I tossed the phone back onto the wooden table, the dark screen reflecting the bright Grecian sun. I stood up from the lounge chair, feeling the warm, soft sand beneath my bare feet. I walked down toward the water, the gentle Aegean waves washing over my ankles. Jamal looked up as I approached his face, breaking into a massive, joyful grin. He pointed proudly to the towering structure he had built. "Look, Mom," he shouted over the sound of the ocean. "I built a castle. It is just like our building." I knelt down beside him in the warm sand, wrapping my arms around his shoulders, breathing in the scent of sunscreen and sea salt. "It is beautiful, baby," I said, kissing the top of his head. "It is the best castle in the world." He leaned against me, completely content, and went back to shaping the walls of his fortress. I looked out over the endless turquoise water, holding my son close. I had stripped my family of their power. I had reclaimed my wealth. I had protected my child. The ultimate revenge was not their destruction. The ultimate revenge was my total, unbreakable peace. The ultimate lesson here is that your worth is never defined by those who fail to see it, even if they share your DNA. When toxic family members try to diminish your light to feel powerful, the most profound revenge isn't tearing them down, it's building yourself up. By walking away from conditional love and establishing firm boundaries, you reclaim your power. True family is found in those who celebrate your authentic self, not those who demand you shrink. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below.